Chapter 1174. Hyzen Plain, Troll Capital. Mulevar. As the capital of the Troll Empire that ruled over Hyzen, Mulevar's magnificence was unimaginable. Mulevar was built on a mountain. Strictly speaking, the Troll capital had been carved out of the mountain itself. From the foot of the mountain to the peak, a gentle slope would be dug out from the belly of the mountain, and sturdy stone buildings would be built on top of it. The gentle slopes were connected by a flight of stone steps. The two sides of the stone steps were densely covered with 2-meter-tall totems, and there was a stone brazier at the entrance of each step. From the bottom to the top, one could see that there were more than 100 stone platforms that could be used for living. Looking into the distance, the huge stone mountain was densely packed with stone houses, but it did not give off the feeling of being crowded or messy at all. Facing the stone passageway was a magnificent stone staircase that led from the foot of the mountain all the way to the top of the mountain. It was so high that it was almost impossible to climb it. At the end of the flight of nearly 10,000 steps, there was an exceptionally majestic shrine. Every day at sunrise or dusk, all the trolls living in Mulevar would gather near the stone steps and pray to the shrine, praying that the great winged serpent god would continue to protect the trolls and bestow them with power, allowing the forest of Dracula to have good weather and an abundance of beasts. However, in the past few days, with the arrival of the otherworldly invaders, the giant demons added another request to their list of prayers. They hoped that the feathered serpent god could display his divine might and protect the giant demons from the plague. Some time ago, the trolls had been sent into the forest to search for the invaders, but they'd been forced to retreat in defeat. Along with them, besides the numerous injured, there was also the terrifying plague. The trolls lived in a primitive state, and they hadn't established an effective medical system. Coupled with the fact that the trolls were all strong and healthy, they rarely suffered from diseases. As a result, there were only 30 to 40 witch doctors in the troll capital, and most of them were at rank 1 or 2. The higher-ups and witch doctors recognized the terror of the plague, and ordered the infected to stay in the temporary camp at the foot of the mountain. They weren't allowed to return home or enter the city. But it was obvious that this order was not carried out firmly and thoroughly. Somehow, the plague managed to spread into the city. Almost overnight, almost half of the 23,000 residents of Mulevar were infected with the terrible plague. For a time, the entire city was filled with pitiful giant demons who were covered in yellow-green poisonous clouds and coughing violently. They were so weak that they could barely stand up. This was because their bodies were strong enough. If such a plague were to spread in a human city, it would probably spawn thousands of plague creatures overnight. When the same plague fell on the trolls, it only made them lose the ability to move, and they could only lie there and suffer. Meanwhile, on a tall stone platform in the temple at the top of the mountain, a few sturdy and bad-tempered troll leaders gathered together and angrily questioned a stooped and skinny troll shaman who was holding a wooden staff in his hand. "Yek, can your people do it or not? When will this plague be eradicated? I can't take it anymore. More than half of my lads are already lying on the ground, and you guys are just sitting around and enjoying the fruits of others' labor without doing anything. Hurry! Come up with a solution. My little Xian Ro is still suffering from the plague at home. If anything happens to her, the Zanga tribe won't take a single cent of your tribute this year." Those who could gather here were the leaders of the various tribes, and they were all powerful rank 3 troll warriors. However, they were helpless against the sudden plague, and could only roar at the shaman leader in front of them. Yek, a rank 3 shaman, and the only one in the troll kingdom. He was already more than 700 years old this year. His long lifespan had allowed him to experience countless twists and turns and risks. Hence, he didn't lose his cool like the other trolls in the face of the terrifying plague. Instead, he displayed a calm demeanor. "Shut up! You bastards, all of you shut up!" Looking at the abnormally irascible leaders surrounding him, Yek abruptly slammed the wooden staff in his hand, and a violent gust of air swept them off their feet, causing them to stagger back a few steps. At the same time he roared, a gigantic phantom of a feathered serpent appeared behind him. This was a powerful creature with strange wings and golden scales. On top of its flat and wide serpent head, two emerald-like eyes shone with a frightening ferocity as they slowly swept across the crowd. The scene immediately quietened down. All the trolls knelt on one knee and pressed their hands against their chests, respectfully offering their reverence and devotion to the manifested feathered serpent god. The enemy is approaching. Due to Kano's incompetence, a trace of my source of power has fallen into their hands. I need all of you to take it back. The feathered serpent god hissed sharply, and a strange sound lingered between heaven and earth. It was so sharp that it could tear apart one's eardrums. Hearing the feathered serpent god's order, the troll leaders couldn't help but look at each other. Finally, a troll gathered his courage and asked, "Great feathered serpent god, where are the enemies?" "Great feathered serpent god, where are the enemies?" "The west. It's very close. I can almost smell the stench coming from them. The plague in Mulevar is caused by them. If I don't take back the source of my power, I won't be able to eradicate the plague." The feathered serpent god's order was so clear that the troll leaders naturally didn't have any room to bargain. The trolls obeyed and hurriedly left the witch doctor's hut, rushing back to their own tribes to gather manpower. After the troll leaders left one after another, the phantom of the feathered serpent god didn't immediately disappear. Instead, it conversed with the witch doctor for a while before slowly dispersing. This was a small, strange space that was independent of the Hyzen plain. It had an area of less than 100,000 square meters. However, the layout was similar to the city of the troll capital. There were huge grayish-white rocks everywhere, grand statues of gods everywhere, and lush forests everywhere. At the center of this strange space, there was a passage covered in moss and small swamps. There was a huge nest made of huge rocks. The air here was hot and humid, similar to a common tropical rainforest. On top of a small stone platform, there was a huge eggshell that was more than a meter tall amidst a thick layer of white bones. The feathered serpent god lay beside the huge egg, using its long and thin tail to sweep it up. Then, it gently spat out golden lightning at it. The violent lightning that used to be full of destruction seemed gentle and peaceful at this moment. It constantly revolved around the huge egg, splitting into countless small scattered electric currents that were slowly swallowed by the huge egg. Every time it swallowed a certain amount of golden lightning, the eggshell would emit a strange spiritual fluctuation of satisfaction. At this time, the little life inside the huge egg would stop swallowing and fall into a deep sleep to digest the golden lightning that carried traces of the plane's origin aura. Only when the huge egg fell into a deep sleep could the huge female feathered serpent god rest for a while. She would close her eyes and open her mouth, quietly waiting for the few male feathered serpents who acted as servants and guards to send food into her mouth. In the entire feathered serpent kingdom, apart from some wild beasts that served as food, the rest were feathered serpents that were worshipped by the trolls. There were only 12 feathered serpent guards, all of them male and with basic strength of grade 2 or 3. The only female was the female feathered serpent god Zuka, who had become stronger and more majestic under the support of the power of faith. She was also the tribal totem god that the forest trolls worship. After experiencing the influence of the power of faith for thousands of years, Zuka had mastered part of the power of divine arts without a teacher. Her basic strength had also jumped to the elementary grade 5. However, due to her instincts as a magical beast, she still consumed a large amount of power of faith and divinity to give birth to a child. During the incubation period, her basic strength had fallen from the elementary grade 5 to the advanced grade 4, and she had to face a period of weakness that lasted as long as 300 years. The feathered serpent god Zuka spat out golden lightning for 3 days and 3 nights before finally feeding the little life inside the huge egg. Thus, when it fell into a deep sleep, Zuka heaved a long sigh of relief and laid down beside the huge egg, closing her eyes to take a nap. However, every time she wanted to enter deep meditation to recover the power she had consumed, a strange energy fluctuation would overflow from her spiritual sea, disturbing her peace. "Bastards! These damned invaders! I'm going to tear you into pieces and grind your bones to ashes." Disturbed by this strange foreign fluctuation, the feathered serpent god Zuka became violent and tyrannical. Its grand and sharp roar instantly resounded in this strange world, causing the entire space to tremble. All the magical beasts who heard this roar were so frightened that their limbs went limp, and they fell to the ground, unable to move. Even the feathered serpent guards were so frightened that they knelt on the ground and spread their wings. They did not know what they had done wrong to anger their master. The little life inside the huge egg was obviously disturbed as well, and it even released an angry spiritual fluctuation with hissing sounds. The feathered serpent god Zuka, who had been abnormally tyrannical just a moment ago, hurriedly suppressed her anger in the next moment. She once again used gentle golden lightning and gentle caresses to coax the huge egg to sleep. The feathered serpent god Zuka straightened its body, and its gaze pierced through this strange space, passing through the temple that stood tall at the top of the troll city, and cast it far into the distance towards the west. Chapter 1175. Inside the forest, somewhere near the city of trolls, in a hidden underground cave, the voodoo ritual was still going on. The voodoo ritual was hosted by the poisoned spirit Remy's old woman, and Remy hid in a corner and watched the whole process with Mary. The cave was not big and the ground was uneven. There were still some ashes from the bonfire. A long time ago, this place might have been the lair of a large carnivorous monster, but unfortunately, its habitat was too close to the city of trolls. So it was obvious that this place was later transformed into a simple camp by the trolls. In the small underground cave, there was a public area, a lounge, an armory, and some unknown small storerooms. A team of 7 trolls guarded this place. Now they had become part of the voodoo ritual and could no longer return to their home. The public camp area was cleared, and countless beast corpses and troll skulls were piled together as fuel. Their souls and flesh were stimulated by the spell formation below, turning into a cluster of pale green willow, the wisp, quietly licking a strange crystal floating above. There were too many souls trapped in the willow, the wisp. They were crying, wailing, and cursing. The spell formation gathered the powerful hatred and resentment that overflowed from them, turned it into a terrible voodoo curse, and sent it all into the power crystal. Based on the resonance of the same source of power, this power crystal was also echoing somewhere in the city of trolls. Following the unbreakable origin connection between them, this extremely powerful voodoo curse was also infecting the source of that miraculous power bit by bit. Through the voodoo ritual, Remy could even hear an angry roar transmitted through the plane of laws. Obviously, the source of the power had discovered the voodoo infection and expressed its anger. Unfortunately, not only did its anger not make Remy afraid, but it made him even more excited. Cursing a god. No, cursing a divine object. For any curse wizard, to be able to experience such a thing once was something to show off and be proud of. So, a few days ago, when Mary took out the power crystal, Remy did not hesitate to accept this scary mission. The reason why this mission was considered terrifying was because this kind of behavior would undoubtedly deeply enrage that godly object. Once it was enraged and carried out unscrupulous revenge, the number of people in the vampire expeditionary force who could escape the pursuit of a god creature could be counted on one hand. How's the effect? Can you pass the plague to that guy? Mary obviously knew nothing about voodoo rituals. After looking at it for a long time, she found nothing, so she could only ask patiently. Remy rolled his eyes at Mary's question. Lady Mary, you think too highly of us. The other party was a divine creature. Don't even mention the plague, we can't even pass on a small curse of weakness. If something goes wrong, this place might even. At this point, Remy suddenly shivered and turned to look in the direction of the voodoo ritual. Over there, above the voodoo ritual, a dark space suddenly twisted and shattered. From inside, a blinding golden lightning bolt burst out. Caught off guard, the old poisonous woman who presided over the ritual screamed in pain as she was struck by the lightning bolt. Her clothes, which were not much to begin with, instantly turned to ashes. Her messy and dirty short hair stood on end, and her greenish-purple skin was charred black. Even her mouth was open, and a wisp of black smoke was coming out. Fortunately, the old poisonous woman had been transformed into a level 3 plague creature, so a divine punishment could not kill her. When she struggled to get up from the ground, Remy opened his mouth and blew a thick yellow-green smoke at her. The poisonous smoke quickly rushed into the old poisonous woman's body and quickly healed the lightning damage she had suffered. However, the holy energy that accompanied the golden lightning was not so easy to dispel. Therefore, the old poisonous woman's strength inevitably decreased a little. Seeing this scene, Mary couldn't help but look at Remy with a strange expression. "You are very smart," Mary said calmly. "Thank you for the compliment." Remy still had a cheeky smile on his face. "You just said that you can't even send a curse spell over, so what's the point of continuing this voodoo ritual?" "Madam Mary, the voodoo ritual may not be able to curse the feathered serpent, but it can corrupt its mind. So, between a smart and cunning feathered serpent god and a feathered serpent god that has been corrupted by violent emotions, which one will you choose?" "The latter, of course. That thing has absolute power, and it will be difficult for us to fight it head-on. But once it loses control of its power, our chance will come." "Are you sure you have a way to make it lose its mind?" Mary asked doubtfully. "If it really is invulnerable, I won't waste time here." Remy's face showed a thoughtful look. "Ever since I used the voodoo ritual to establish a connection with the feathered serpent, I have felt very strange. It doesn't seem to be as powerful as the trolls described." "Oh, what did you discover?" "Either your previous information is wrong or it is in a weakened state. In any case, that feathered serpent god is definitely not a grade 5 creature, but a grade 4 creature. Otherwise, the divine punishment just now would not have hurt it so little. Not grade 5 but grade 4. Mary could not help but feel surprised and happy. She did not have Alice's ability to use a hammer and a piece of beast bone to see through the enemy's secrets. On the battlefield, any trace of information about the enemy had to be exchanged with blood and lives. Thus, when she heard Poison Spirit Remy's judgment, Mary was both surprised and delighted. She became even more bewildered. If the enemy was really only a Tier 4 divine warrior as Remy had guessed, then Mary and the others might have a chance at survival. As a vampire sorcerer from the main plane, even if the opponent was a grade higher than them, they did not fear a powerhouse from a subplane. Not for anything else, but knowledge, techniques, equipment, and awareness. The natives of this plane might not know much about sorcerers, but sorcerers could obtain a wealth of knowledge about other planes from books and knowledge crystals. By counteracting the effects of the plane's suppression, the sorcerers of the main plane were superior in all aspects to the natives of the subplanes, who were still in a primitive and ignorant state. In terms of battle strength, the vampire expeditionary force led by Mary could not contend against thousands of brave troll warriors with strong bodies. However, with just a small plague, Mary and the others were able to force the terrifying troll army to retreat without shedding a single drop of blood. Even when faced with a capital of 20,000 to 30,000 trolls, Mary and the others were not the least bit afraid. Instead, they schemed to catch all the enemies in one fell swoop. They even schemed against the native totem god that had been hiding behind the scenes all this time, the feathered serpent god. The only thing that gave her confidence was the difference in mentality between the two of them. As a sorcerer of the main plane, even if Mary's strength was slightly inferior to the other party, she still saw herself as a predator. No matter how strong and brave the other party was, in her eyes, it was just a fat wild boar. However, just as she was thinking fiercely, Soros, who was in charge of guarding the perimeter, strode in. "Master, there's movement in the capital of trolls. A large number of troll warriors are charging in this direction. It looks like they want to find us." "Humph, it looks like that stinky snake is anxious and sent them out again. Inform all the bloodbreeds to move out. Lure them into the depths of the forest and kill them." At this point, Mary's expression became excited. "I don't believe that the stinky snake can still safely stay in its nest after so many of its followers have died. If it can still endure this, then it means that there's really something wrong with its body. When that time comes, we'll kill our way into its nest. Let's go." With that, Mary whistled and rushed out of the hiding place with her many vampire subordinates. As for the site of the voodoo ceremony, there was a grade 3 poisonous old woman presiding over it, as well as Remy the poison spirit. For the trolls to be able to break through the vampire's line of defense and cause trouble here, they were definitely not very lucky. Otherwise, why would they do something so suicidal? Somewhere in the Hyzen Plain, Dracula Forest. In the depths of the dark and deep tropical forest, a large amount of strange black matter had appeared in the sky above a slightly spacious clearing. This substance was like liquid, churning and vibrating in the air, appearing abnormally active and restless. Finally, with a tearing sound, the plain's space was torn apart, and a dark substance as thick as ink gushed out from the crack. In an instant, the clearing in the forest was dyed black and gloomy. In the endless darkness, 2 dim lights suddenly lit up in a hazy and illusory shadow. Shadow fiends had magical bodies, and the influence of the power of the plane was extremely small. Almost as soon as they crossed over, they broke free from the suppression of the will of the plane. "Find Lady Mary. Protect her," the shadow fiend muttered in a strange tone, quickly locating Mary's location. "Northeast, 2,700 miles." With the other party's information, the shadow fiend did not hesitate to move. Unlike other magical machines that ran or flew in the air, the shadow fiend's movement was especially strange and sinister. Relying on its shadow traversal ability, the shadow fiend appeared in the huge shadow of a tall ancient tree 100 meters away in a flash. It only paused for a moment before its figure disappeared again, directly appearing in another shadow 100 meters away. However, the remaining resources are not enough to make one more cloud giant potion. "Which one is missing?" 300 grams of active ancient giant spinal cord, hiss. Aunake felt his teeth ache even more. The cloud giant potion he wanted to concoct was a rank 6 potion, and it required the active spinal cord of an ancient giant, which was an extremely rare magus resource. It was almost impossible to replenish it in a short period of time. The ancient giants had been extinct for tens of thousands of years, and it was extremely difficult to obtain their active spinal cord. Aunake had only found a group of descendants with the bloodline of the ancient giants in a small plain. He had slaughtered over 100 sub-blood giants in one go and continuously refined them, increasing their activity. Only then did he manage to obtain a suitable batch of active giant spinal cord. Now that he had used up all of the main ingredients, where could he find more? But just as Aunake was feeling vexed, new information came from the tower spirit compass. "Warning! Warning! Strong energy waves detected in the outskirts of Camp Isorda. Target location, XXX. Magus Kaelf of the Inspection Department sent you a message 27 hours ago asking if the camp needs to intervene. He is currently awaiting your reply." The Inspection Department was a Magus organization under Camp Isorda. They were mainly in charge of the security and basic order around the camp. Kaelf was a rank 4 Magus and the head of the Inspection Department. 27 hours ago? Looks like I missed out on a lot of interesting things while concocting the Cloud Giant potion. Aunake laughed sinisterly. "Compass, bring me the report Kaelf submitted." "Yes." A moment later, a magic mirror the size of a round table floated in front of Wizard Aunake. It was filled with all sorts of books, magic notes, and all sorts of strange little objects. In the middle of the table, there was a piece of parchment with strange and beautiful patterns on its edges. It was faintly flashing with a red light, indicating that it was in an emergency state. Onik tapped the parchment with his right hand, which had a ring on it. With a walla sound, it quickly unfurled in front of him, revealing the densely packed information within. A newly established outskirts camp? The Crimson Family, Steel City, the Istanbul Families Team. After quickly reading through the report sent by the inspection department, Wizard Onik, who had just lost a large amount of resources, had a sinister look on his face. He casually contacted Kaelf through a spell. A strange male with golden skin appeared on the screen. He had no eyebrows or hair. After seeing Wizard Onik, he hurriedly bowed in greeting. "What's the situation now?" Onik yawned and asked impatiently. "The fierce battle is still ongoing, they're still fighting? How is that possible? The Istanbul family has a large number of high-ranked magi. How could they be in a deadlock with a family that has just stepped into the outer world? Could it be that all the high-ranked magi of the Isatar family are dead?" Hearing Great Wizard Onik's astonished question, the golden-skinned magus smiled bitterly. He then turned the camera and pointed the magic mirror at the battlefield in the distance. The battle was still intense. As the defending side, Steel City displayed astonishing defensive capabilities and even more shocking offensive capabilities. In just a month's time, Steel City had already extended its tentacles to every corner of this giant floating rock. A thick layer of metal armor completely armed the floating rock, making the inside of the giant rock the true core of Steel City. The top of the giant rock was covered with thick metal plates, and tall metal towers could be seen everywhere. Countless pitch-black cannons protruded from them, pointing at the surrounding void. At the center of the many metal buildings was a tall and majestic metal palace, its mouth wide open, becoming the only main road in and out of the giant rock. In front of the metal palace was a huge plaza that occupied an area of 10,000 square meters. Tall and mighty metal magical machines were arranged in neat rows on the plaza. At this very moment, Steel Capital was like a metal hedgehog that had curled up, hiding all of its weaknesses under the thick metal deck, and the only thing that could protect it were the layers of arcane cannons on the surface of the giant rock. Fighting against Steel City was a team of 3,000 magi. All of them wore a dark blood badge on their chests, which was also the insignia of the Isatar family's Dark Blood Legion. The Dark Blood Legion was the most famous magus team of the Isatar family, a Tier 5 organization. Its members were all dark blood magi from other planes. It was said that they were the products of bloodline synthesis experiments and were considered a kind of witchcraft creation. Aside from carrying out higher-grade bloodline synthesis experiments, such magi no longer had the ability to advance and level up on their own. To put it bluntly, they were a group of mass-produced humanoid wizard beasts that only possessed some magus attack methods. All the dark blood magi were riding on some kind of mutated, enlarged owls, circling around Steel City at lightning speed. Every time they swooped down, they would brandish the staff in their hands, releasing one elemental spell after another with astonishing offensive effects. Their ranks varied, with 8 Tier 3 dark blood magi and over 70 Tier 2 magi leading them. The rest were generally at the advanced Tier 1 level. It was precisely such an astonishingly powerful force that had firmly sealed off the giant rock occupied by Steel Capital before charging into the sky in droves to bombard it. Chapter 1177. The arduous battle lasted for 20 hours, and the Dark Blood Legion had only lost about 30 Tier 1 sorcerers. As for the Steel Capital, apart from the metallic defensive layer on the surface of the rock, which had been blasted into smithereens, only the few metal towers on the outskirts had been destroyed one after another. As for the metallic magic equipment, over 100 of them had been destroyed, while none of the high-grade magic equipment above Grade 2 had been damaged. From these numbers, one could see how gentle the battle had been. If this had been a normal war between magi, the casualties on both sides would have been more than tenfold. The shock waves from the battle had attracted the attention of the patrolling team from Exhilarating camp. However, after seeing the badges worn by the dark blood magi, the patrolling team did not interfere in the battle. Instead, they reported the matter to their superiors. This matter involved the Isthel family, a Tier 5 organization. Ordinary patrolling magi did not have the strength to interfere in a battle of this level. Moreover, this was only the border of the Exhilarating camp. Strictly speaking, it was not part of the camp's territory. Hence, the patrolling magi could only stand guard outside the battlefield and observe the battle from the sidelines. It was precisely because of this confidence that the Isthel family's Tier 4 magus was so unbridled. Otherwise, any magus family that took the initiative to start a fight in Exhilarating camp would be punished by the great magus stationed there, even if they won. When the battle had dragged on for 20 hours, the Isthel family's Tier 4 magus finally realized that something was wrong. If the Crimson family was really relying on mana crystals to support the Steel City, then they would have been completely depleted by now and would have to pour out their hearts and lungs. However, the Dark Blood Magi had already lost a small team, and the terrifying Steel Capital was still filled with ferocious firepower. It did not look like it was running out of energy at all. Bastard! There must be something strange about the enemy's fortress. We can't drag this on any longer. Juver, lead the first team and charge in. Occupy a strong hold on the surface of the enemy's city. Yes. Hearing the Tier 4 sorcerer's command, a Tier 3 male dark blood sorcerer with an aquiline nose and a gloomy expression laughed sinisterly. He patted the gigantic owl beneath him and led 500 dark blood sorcerers in a dive. Weno, you're proficient in plants. After Zhu Hua occupies a stable stronghold, you'll be in charge of creating magic vines and drilling through this damned boulder. Yes, everything is as you wish. Venair was a Tier 3 male sorcerer whose body glowed with a green glow. He was also covered in all sorts of bottles and jars. After he bowed and accepted the order, he waved his hand and led his 300 direct subordinates out of the formation. Therefore, when groups of dark blood sorcerers raised their shields and swooped down against the dense cannons, a dense number of magic cannons extended from the metal towers and opened fire instantly. The dark space in the outskirts was instantly as bright as day. The overly dense and ferocious magical attacks were like a large energy net, smashing into the Dark Blood Magi's team. The ferocity of the attacks and the shocking strength of the magical energy caused the expressions of all the magi inside and outside the battlefield to change. Damn it, what a terrifying attack! Just as the Tier 4 Magus' heart sank, it was as if a grand firework had bloomed on the battlefield. A terrifying torrent of energy instantly engulfed the hundreds of dark blood magi at the forefront. Bang bang bang, with such concentrated firepower, even if the magical shields were 10 times stronger, they would not be able to defend against it. Hence, as the magical shields shattered one after another, the violent magical energy swept in and directly engulfed the 100 or so dark blood magi at the forefront. Energy surged, elemental explosions, severed limbs, flesh and blood splattered. 126 Tier 1 Dark Blood Magi and 11 Tier 2 Dark Blood Magi became the pitiful victims of the Steel Capital's first round of counterattack. Most of the Magi, along with the owls they were mounted on, were riddled with holes and smashed to pieces. Broken limbs and blood poured down like rain. Some of the Magi who suffered from the concentrated fire were directly vaporized, not even leaving behind a single piece of their body. Chapter 1178. The Dark Blood Wizard who was riding on the giant owl continued to dive. Energy rays shot out from the Steel City, covering the sky in a dense array, leaving no room for evasion. The Dark Blood Magi had erected colorful shields around their bodies, and under the concentrated attack of the energy rays, the shields began to tremble and ripple violently. The color of the shields also rapidly fell from yellow, signifying danger, to red, signifying danger. Many low-grade wizards had their shields shattered, and their bodies were blown up into pieces by the energy storm. Sticky blood splattered down from the sky. Taking advantage of this opportunity, a torrential downpour of spells rained down, instantly baptizing the metal buildings on the surface of the Steel City. Don't get tangled up with these inanimate objects. Charge down. Juware, who had been ordered by the Tier 4 Magus to charge, saw the fierce net of firepower in front of him. It would be extremely difficult for him to charge through on his owl. Hence, he bellowed and jumped off his mount. His entire body transformed into a blazing meteor as he smashed towards the massive metal plaza in front of the steel temple. Swift as the wind, violent as fire, withstanding over 100 energy rays, the blazing meteor smashed into the edge of the metal plaza in a berserk manner. Boom! A loud, muffled sound echoed. A terrifying shockwave of black flames erupted from the point of impact, sending thousands of twisted metal fragments flying in all directions. The metal buildings and fortresses in the vicinity crackled and became riddled with holes. Amidst the thick pillar of dust, a tall and mighty dark blood giant stood up and let out a terrifying roar that intimidated everyone present. At this moment, the dark blood giant was in a massive crater that was 20 meters wide and 7 meters deep. At the edge of the crater, one could see a 1-meter-thick, twisted metal barrier. However, just as Juware's dark blood giant roared towards the sky, the magic cannons on the metal towers near the crater adjusted their muzzles and aimed at the audacious Tier 3 Magus. BZZT. BZZT, with a flick of his finger, concentrated energy rays rained down on the dark blood giant's body. The violent mana instantly engulfed the dark blood giant. The energy was berserk, and the electric light was sharp. The entire battlefield was filled with blinding rays of light, and soul-stirring sizzling sounds could be heard everywhere. The place was filled with the terrifying stench of burnt flesh. When the round of attacks came to an end, the dazzling snow-white light imprinted in the air slowly dissipated, and everyone finally saw the dark blood giant's figure again. Wretched, extremely wretched, his 5-meter-tall body was already riddled with holes, and blood was gushing out like a fountain. The mutilated limbs were full of scars left behind by the energy wreaking havoc. There were frostbites left behind by the frost spell, burn marks left behind by the lightning spell, and fragments left behind by the wind spell. However, the Tier 3 Magus' outstanding magic resistance and tenacious vitality allowed him to stubbornly resist this round of attacks and survive. Just as the Steel City was constantly adjusting the magic cannons and preparing for the second round of violent attacks. Whoosh! 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 Over 100 meteors covered in black flames fell into the Steel City, setting off massive flaming shockwaves and towering pillars of dust everywhere. The Dark Blood Giant army led by Juware had successfully landed on the surface of the Steel City. However, the moment they successfully landed, the magical weapon army that was hidden in the strongholds and fortresses around the metal square also rushed out and began to attack the scattered Dark Blood Giants. Hence, dozens of extremely intense small-scale battlefields appeared on the ground in an instant. This time, the attackers turned out to be an army of enchanted machines, while the Dark Blood Giants that had crossed the line of fire to reach the Steel Capital could only passively endure attacks from all directions. The battle between the two sides almost instantly submerged the Steel City in the flames of war that soared into the sky. The team led by Wizard Wenno was the second batch to rush to the surface of the Steel City. Over 30 Dark Blood Giants, each 4 to 5 meters tall, formed a small circle, and with the cover of their companions' bodies, they barely managed to resist the concentrated cannons. The rest of the Dark Blood Giants charged out with all their might, clashing with the metal magic machine army that pounced on them amidst the sizzling sounds of fire. On one side were the giants of flesh and blood with amazing magic resistance, and on the other side was the magic machine army that did not fear death and charged forward bravely. Both sides were bathed in blood on the metal plaza, engaging in melee combat with each other, creating terrifying deaths at every moment. Taking advantage of the fact that the steel capital's ferocious firepower was drawn away by the dark blood giants, the dark blood magi led by Veneer took out green seeds from their pouches and threw them into the cracks in the rocks that were close to being destroyed. Then, they immediately started chanting strange incantations, condensing strange runes into the ground. After a moment, the earth shook and the boulders trembled. Terrifying vines that looked like demons and ghosts sprang out from the ground, quickly growing taller and thicker, and intertwined together, forming an even thicker and more terrifying humanoid monster. The roots and tentacles of the vines were still drilling and churning in the rock stratum, and its exposed vines were also growing and spreading wildly. Almost in the blink of an eye, 100-meter-tall, extremely strange vines appeared in front of them, and began to attack the several towering metal towers around it. And the way it attacked was also very strange. 2 large green hands, formed from thousands of vines intertwining and twisting, suddenly stretched forward, and the vine's branches at the front rapidly extended and grew like a surging torrent, stabbing into the muzzles on the metal towers. In the next second, green vines, like nimble octopus tentacles, spread and burrowed everywhere inside the metal towers. As long as there was a gap, they could reach in and fill it with the wildly growing vines and branches. Meanwhile, the intertwined vines madly whipped and pierced the objects that could still move, wrapping around the magic cannons one after another, squeezing and twisting them until they creaked. More vines clashed with the metal magical machinery guarding the metal tower. One side was like a snake slithering around the battlefield, madly whipping everything in sight, trying to smash the magic weapons into pieces. The metal machinery, on the other hand, relied on metal chainsaws and flamethrowers to resist, waging a bloody battle against the vines in every corner of the metal towers. Although such a huge plant monster was only at Tier 3, the pressure it brought to Steel City was no less than that of a Tier 4 Magus. Moreover, with its tenacious vitality and the almost endless growth ability of its vines, the degree of chaos it brought to Steel City was even greater than that of a Tier 4 Magus. If this plant monster was allowed to continue wreaking havoc, it would be wishful thinking for Steel City to organize a large-scale and orderly counterattack. Hence, Gazruvi, who was hidden in the depths of Steel City, immediately activated Magic Furnace No. 3 and Magic Furnace No. 4, allowing them to charge a hidden magic cannon. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, at the edge of the metal hall, 2 100-meter-wide metal towers rose from the ground with a loud rumble. When they reached 200 meters in height, they stopped growing. Instead, they slowly rotated, revealing the 30-meter-wide cannon muzzle at the center of the towers. The moment everyone saw the cannons were already gathering a frightening amount of magical energy. Lines of spiraling runes lit up one after another along the tower's body, and the terrifying sound of energy gathering rang out in the void. "Wenno, dodge!" a loud, earth-shaking male voice suddenly rang out. It was the voice of the Tier 4 Magus from the Ister family. The Tier 3 Dark Magus Wenno, who was hiding among the vines, had long since discovered that the 2 cannons were locked onto his position. However, when the magic cannons in the distance quickly charged, his ears, mind, and spiritual world were all filled with the terrifying sound of energy gathering. Horrified, he tried to dodge to the side, but when he lifted his arms and legs, they felt as heavy as lead. His entire body felt as if he was moving against the flow of a fast-flowing river, and it was difficult for him to even move a single step. Spiritual pressure? Where did this spiritual pressure come from? Wenno relied on his profound knowledge as a Tier 3 Magus to quickly discern the nature of this ability that was affecting his body and mind. However, before he could take out a suitable magic tool to neutralize this terrifying psychic power, the giant magic cannons in the distance vibrated slightly. 2 extremely dense fireballs of energy, which had been compressed to the extreme, bombarded the body of the giant vine monster, leaving a spiraling trail behind. The vines, which were as tough as steel, melted in an instant. The two fireballs penetrated the thorny armor that was tens of meters thick, and simultaneously bombarded Wenno's magic shield. A muffled bang sounded. An astonishingly hot and bright red sun rose from the inside of the monster, vaporizing everything within a radius of 1,000 meters as easily as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. That Magus Wenno and the 100 or so dark blood magi around him did not even have the chance to make a sound before they were vaporized in an instant. Their lives, souls, and all other auras disappeared without a trace. The entire world was left with a terrifying white light that one could not look straight at, and a wave of heat that could corrode one's soul. The terrifying destructive power of the two magic cannons' combined attack was not the least bit inferior to the all-out attack of a Tier 4 Magus. Back in the day, even the amethyst dragon Toriel, who had thick skin and was known for its physical defense, had to retreat in silence under the bombardment of the magic cannons. How could these dark blood magi, who were only Tier 2 and Tier 3, withstand such power? Inside and outside the battlefield, be it the dark blood magi who were bathed in blood, or the patrolling magi who were hiding in the distance and observing the battlefield, their faces were pale, and their hearts were beating wildly. Chapter 1179. Wenno had died in battle. There were also 132 dark blood wizards who died with him. As for those injured by the shock waves from the magic cannons, over 300 were injured, including the dark blood giant Juwer, who had been fighting on the front lines. The two magic cannons had opened fire for the first time, killing one Tier 3 dark blood magi and heavily injuring the other. The vine monster that had been wreaking havoc on the battlefield had also withered and died instantly. In a situation where there were no Tier 4 magi holding the line, such a result was practically a miracle. The shock that this attack brought to the Tier 4 magi of the Iskall family was incomparable. As a veteran Tier 4 magus, he had originally looked down on the Crimson family, who had just risen to power and dared to show themselves outside the city. However, that earth-shattering attack just now caused him to break out in a cold sweat from fright. The combined attack of two magic cannons could rival the full-powered attack of a Tier 4 magus. Even he would have a high chance of being injured if he had encountered such an attack. After all, a magus could only rely on their own strength to maintain a wizard shield, and it was impossible for them to withstand such a powerful energy attack. This was also the main reason why a majority of magi preferred to stay in their own wizard's pagoda. However, on the battlefield, while the humans might be stunned, the magic weapons would not. Taking advantage of the gap in the magi cannon's shock, the concentrated magic cannons immediately turned their muzzles around, targeting the injured magi within range. 2 consecutive rounds of terrifying volleys took the lives of more than 20 dark blood sorcerers. Meanwhile, Steel Capital's unbridled attacks had thoroughly enraged the Tier 4 magus. This magus, who had been hiding behind the scenes since the start of the battle, only watching and not participating in the battle, could not help but step out. In truth, he could not be blamed for his cowardice. Rather, he was restricted by an unwritten rule in Exodar camp, which prevented him from taking action as he pleased. In any foreign camp, as long as there were no Tier 4 magi or above participating, regardless of the level of the battle, it would be treated as an ordinary dispute and friction. The camp's garrison would not interfere directly. However, if a Tier 4 or higher magus were involved, the chances of the camp's garrison interfering would increase significantly. Take the previous battle, for example. No matter how intense the battle was, no matter how many sorcerers died, as long as there were no rank 4 sorcerers involved, and as long as the basic order of the camp was not disrupted, the patrolling sorcerers would only watch from the sidelines. They would not interfere at all. However, now that the Isator family's Tier 4 sorcerers could no longer hold back, the nature of the war had changed. In the hidden void around the battlefield, several patrol squads gathered together and began to discuss whether they should intervene directly. Meanwhile, one message after another was sent to the camp. Even Lord Kaelf, the Apex Tier 4 Inspector Division head, was alerted and rushed to the scene. Hence, by the time the Rank 6 Magus Aunake received the news and focused his attention here, the battle in the extraterritorial battlefield had already reached the point where blood was being spilled. The Tier 4 Magus of the Isator family was obviously a terrifying male body-tempering sorcerer. He wore exquisite yellow leather armor, and did not have many accessories or tools on him, making him look especially plain and clean. However, he carried a strange black demonic sword on his back, and the strange aura it exuded was eye-catching. His appearance was neither handsome nor ugly. He looked ordinary. However, when he took a step forward, no longer suppressing his power, allowing the surging, violent energy to spread in this space, all life forms that sensed this aura could not help but shudder, their expressions turning solemn. Even Gaz Ruvi, the mutant brain hiding in the core area of the boulder, could not help but feel nervous. He immediately raised the alert level of Steel City to the highest level. Through the interaction of auras, Steel City could already feel the biting cold, killing intent coming from the depths of the other party's soul. Evidently, Steel City's stubborn resistance and incisive counterattack had angered the other party, causing him to plan to go all out. In previous battles, due to Gaz Ruvi showing weakness to the enemy, the two sides had a 60-40 advantage. The Dark Blood Legion had a 60-40 advantage, while Steel City had a 40-40 advantage. On the surface, although the Dark Blood Legion had suffered many casualties, Steel City's losses were even greater. However, if one really counted with one's fingers, one would be surprised to find that the Dark Blood Legion's losses were all genuine Dark Blood Magi. On the other hand, Steel City's losses were only metal fortresses, metal buildings, and as many as 2,000 metal magic machines. If one were to measure it on the surface, Steel City's losses were undoubtedly far greater than the Dark Blood Legion's. However, considering the hidden goblin factory beneath Steel City, which could continuously use free energy and free magic alloys to build a magic machine army, the Isator family had undoubtedly suffered a huge loss. In this confrontation of using magic machines to exchange for magi, the Isator family had undoubtedly suffered a huge loss. However, the true face of Steel City had always been hidden underground, and outsiders could not see through the metal protective layer and the metal rock layer that was tens of meters thick. Hence, Steel City could drag the war into a difficult battle of attrition with its favorite method. However, when the Tier 4 Magus chose to take action, the entire situation on the battlefield immediately changed. The might of a Tier 4 Magus could be seen from this. The man wielding the magic sword stepped on the void, slowly walking towards the metal hall step by step. With every step he took, he would swing his sword at one of the metal buildings beneath him. Wherever the invisible sword light passed, black smoke would appear. All matter, be it sturdy or not, metal or natural rock, would instantly crumble and explode into broken and twisted fragments. The mutated brain Gaz Ruvi saw it with his own eyes. A team of metal magic machines that had just stepped out of the assembly line and rushed to the surface was slashed by a sword light that was difficult to see with the naked eye. In an instant they disintegrated and exploded into countless metal fragments all over the ground. When the invisible sword light slashed at the ground, it left a terrifying pit that was nearly 100 meters long. When it slashed at a metal tower, the upper half of the tower would rumble and collapse amidst a series of ear-piercing sounds of friction, and the exposed metal section was flat and smooth. As for the counterattacks launched by Steel City, they were all blocked by a layer of strange and twisted protective force field. No matter how many energy rays and energy fireballs there were, if they could not stack their attacks, they would not be able to do anything to the physique refinement sorcerer's protective force field. If they wanted to make him restrain himself, only an attack like the giant magic cannons could stop him a little. Hence, without hesitation, the two huge towers that stood on both sides of the metal hall slowly rotated again, revealing the two terrifying pitch-black cannons inside. BZZT BZZT BZZT. The strange sound of energy converging rang out once more. Waves of extremely powerful magical energy passed through the energy pipes, passing through the thick hollow tower and being transmitted to the giant magic cannons. Within the exposed thick cannons, spiral energy circuits lit up one after another. The violent energy that could shake one's heart rapidly gathered at the back of the cannons, compressing and condensing. The energy aura that leaked out was like a monstrous wave that could topple mountains and overturn the seas, causing one to feel fear at the sight of it. The sword-wielding man laughed sinisterly as he stepped lightly on the air. His entire body instantly flashed to his original position, evading the heterogeneous brain Gaz Lu's silent mental lock. No matter how powerful Gaz Lu's mental ability was, he was still a Tier 3 creature. If he wanted to use mental pressure to restrict his opponent's movements like before, then bombard him with the cannons, it would be impossible for him to do so. Such an idea would not work on a Tier 4 enemy at all. Chapter 1180. It had to be said that as long as the golem dragon appeared on the battlefield, it would become the king of the battlefield. By the time the man with the demonic sword reached the entrance of the Steel City, there were innumerable fragments of enchanted machinery behind him, as well as the ruins of the city that appeared to have gone through the apocalypse. The two magic cannons had also quietly stopped firing, having been cut into countless pieces by the magic sword. However, the crazy shooting of the magic cannons before they were destroyed had also caused the Dark Blood Army to suffer heavy losses. The initial estimate was that the number of Dark Blood sorcerers who had died was as high as 1,300. After that sorcerer Winnow, another Tier 3 sorcerer could not dodge in time and became the last crazy sacrifice of the magic cannons. At this point, the losses of the Istanbul family had reached a point where even bystanders felt a faint heartache. However, with so many sacrifices, they had also swept away the magic defense on the surface of the Steel City. Now, there were only more than 100 magic Imperial guards guarding the entrance. The 5 magic captains at the front had the strength of Tier 3, and the rest of the members were all Tier 2. With such a fearless and loyal army of magical machines, it would be extremely difficult for ordinary invaders to invade the Steel City. However, when the enemy this team faced was a powerful and terrifying Tier 4, no one thought that they could continue to hold their post. And the truth was indeed so. The combined magic shield put up by 5 Tier 3 and 98 Tier 2 magic equipment suddenly burst under the third attack of the man with the magic sword. 2 of the 5 magic captains were also cut into sparks, and their bodies were damaged. And when their crazy counterattack landed on the body of the man with the magic sword, it only left small burn marks. As the man with the magic sword strode forward, these burn marks were still healing and disappearing at a speed visible to the naked eye. The toughness of a Tier 4 refinement sorcerer's body was even greater than that of most monsters of the same rank, and all magic equipment below Tier 4 could cause him very little damage. However, just as the man with the magic sword revealed a ferocious expression and was about to cut these magic equipment into pieces in one go, the metal square in front of him suddenly shook. The entire rocky ground, together with the 2-meter-thick metal deck, began to undulate like waves of mud. The ground cracked and the metal deck was lifted into the air. Then, it was cut into countless pieces by the flashing sword light, which flew in all directions like raindrops. In the middle of the square was a huge black hole. A gigantic creature that had never been seen before was climbing out of the hole by the rock wall. When the monster appeared in the cave, everyone was surprised by its strange appearance and strange way of appearing. However, when it crawled out of the cave and stood on the square with a loud thud, everyone gulped with difficulty. Once again, they experienced the visual suppression of a super-large creature on ordinary people. Looking at the giant metal legs that were as thick as stone pillars, the humongous body that was as huge as a hill, the ferocious and terrifying metal dragon head, and the ghastly sharp teeth that flickered with a dark blue luster. Every human who witnessed the majestic and heroic appearance of the magical puppet dragon could not help but feel shocked and shuddered deep in their hearts. Such a big fellow shouldn't even appear in a small-scale magus battle. Only the bloody and cruel planar battlefield was the stage for it to display its strength. Even though the man with the magic sword knew that the Crimson family would teleport the magical puppet dragon to the Outland's stronghold at the crucial moment, he still could not help but gulp when he saw the creature standing proudly in front of him. The pressure was too great. Those who had never faced the magical puppet dragon's gigantic body and terrifying power would never understand the anxiety and heavy pressure of facing a peerless, ferocious beast. Just like the man with the magic sword in front of him. Although he was quite confident that he could rely on his sharp attacks and his opponent's clumsy body to win this Tier 4 battle, he still had to be careful and focused. Facing the magical puppet dragon that was slowly approaching him, he still had to be careful and fully focused. He had no choice. With the advantage of its size, it could crush him in both strength and vitality. The only way he could win was to avoid its ferocious attacks and find its weak points to attack. During this period of time, he didn't want to be touched by the other party's thick metal limbs or the cold, sharp teeth that were like guillotines. As for the two giant magic cannons on his back, they were also a huge threat to him. The mental pressure that the man with the magic sword had to bear was as heavy as a mountain in order to break through the magical puppet dragon's physical defense and destroy the cannons. Roar! The moment the magical puppet dragon appeared, it shocked everyone. It raised its head and let out deafening roars as it crawled toward the man with the magic sword. While moving forward, countless small holes opened up around its enormous body, shooting out densely packed energy rays and energy fireballs. These attacks were not used against the man with the magic sword, but against the dark blood sorcerers who were too close to the battlefield. As for the two magic cannons on the back of the magical puppet dragon, their muzzles were aimed at the man with the magic sword. Strange energy whistled and echoed in the sky. Bang! Two muffled sounds were heard. Two violent energy fireballs flew out like lightning and hit the place where the man with the magic sword was originally standing. The violent magic energy, which was so strong that it could not be vented, exploded. The metal deck near the explosion point quickly became thin and brittle under the terrifying light and heat. Then, it broke and twisted like rice paper and wrinkled into a strange shape. Finally, it was shattered by the terrifying energy shockwave, turning into countless shrapnel that shot in all directions. Even the 2-meter-thick magic alloy was in such a state, let alone the exposed magic machinery and dark blood sorcerers, who were as fragile as a paper doll. They could not resist the shockwave for more than 3 seconds before they turned into ashes and were swept to some unknown corner. The aftermath of a battle between Grade 4 powerhouses was not something that low-level creatures could withstand. The magical machines and dark blood sorcerers who were bathed in blood a moment ago were like ants that had suddenly awakened their survival instincts, fleeing for their lives to the distance of the battlefield. Only the magic cannons on the remaining half of the metal tower continued to spew flames dutifully, creating greater chaos on the battlefield. In an instant, the surroundings of the metal plaza were cleared. There were no more people or cannons within a radius of several thousand meters. Only the huge golem dragon and the man with the magic sword were fighting fiercely on the huge metal square that was close to 10,000 square meters. In terms of physique and strength, the magical puppet dragon had the upper hand, but in terms of speed and agility, the man with the magic sword had the upper hand. Although the man was not known for his agility, his speed was still shocking compared to a huge creature like the magical puppet dragon. Holding the magic sword in his hand, the man swiftly shuttled between the puppet dragon's huge limbs, withstanding the concentrated energy rays. As long as he had the chance, he would swing the magic sword and leave a terrifying wound that was more than half a meter deep on the magical puppet dragon's limbs. In the previous battle, the man with the magic sword could casually cut down a metal tower. But now, no matter how thick the magical puppet dragon's limbs were, they could not be thicker than the metal tower, and yet he could not cut them down. The main reason for this was the existence of powerful magic energy. The metal tower was just a metal tower. No matter how thick the metal layer was, it could not withstand the terrifying power of a grade 4 magic sword. On the other hand, the puppet dragon was also made of metal, but the powerful magical energy was poured into every corner and every inch of space on its huge metal body. The magic sword might be able to cut through the magic alloy, but it was inevitable that its power would be greatly reduced by the magic energy in the process. While the puppeteer dragon was entangled with the man with the demon sword, the two originally destroyed magic cannons were repaired under the control of the heterogeneous brain, Gaz Ruvi. Hence, when the giant magic cannons rose amidst the loud rumbles, everyone's expression stiffened. 4 magic cannons? With the assistance of these 2 magic energy cannons, the gaps in the magic energy firepower net were filled, leaving the man with even less space to dodge. Finally, as the 4 giant magic energy cannons fired wildly, the man with the demon sword could not dodge in time and was hit squarely on his body. Bang! The man with the demon sword was sent flying out of Steel City and into the endless darkness around the giant floating rock. More than half of his clothes were burned away, and the demon sword in front of him buzzed and vibrated incessantly. He opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood, revealing a basin-sized burn wound on his chest. Even so, the wound was healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Taking advantage of the time the man with the demon sword left, the terrifying puppet dragon began to charge at the place where the dark blood sorcerers were gathered with earth-shattering steps. Sizzling magical rays, berserk energy fireballs, energy beams that swept across the horizon, as well as the area of effect energy cannons. The dark blood sorcerers, who had held a certain advantage before, could no longer stand on the surface of the Steel City under the crushing blows of the golem dragons, and were actually banished to the distant dark void. Without the restraints of the Tier 4 sorcerers, the puppet dragon was a terrifying war machine created by all the goblin engineers of the Crimson family. Its destructive power against normal sorcerers was simply astonishing. Meanwhile, the magic royal guards that bullied the weak and feared the strong were entrenched around the puppet dragon, like soldiers clustered around a general, and began a frenzied pursuit of the defeated dark blood sorcerers. It was only when the other party escaped from Steel City and hid in the surrounding dark void did they stop. Seeing the foreign sorcerers he brought with him being chased by the other party unscrupulously, the man with the demon sword, who had some minor injuries on his body, grinned sinisterly. He gripped his demon sword tightly, intending to rush back to the battlefield. However, just as he moved, he suddenly stopped and turned to look at a certain spot in front of him. There, a male sorcerer with golden skin, no eyebrows, and no hair suddenly appeared, blocking his way. "Kaelf? You want to block my way?" The man with the demon sword's expression turned sinister, black smoke curling around his body, and he looked like he was about to explode in anger. "Weston, you've already lost this battle." The golden-skinned magus showed no signs of fear, and coldly stared at him. "We haven't lost. As long as I'm here, we haven't lost this battle." The man with the demon sword Weston was enraged. "Get out of my way. I want to personally chop that big lump of metal into pieces. I want to tear that fellow in Steel City into 1,000 pieces." The golden-skinned magus stood his ground, not moving an inch. "Weston, this is Isorda Camp, not the territory of your Isatar family. I don't know why you're attacking the Crimson family, but you've already lost today's battle. Seeing that your Isatar family is also an old member of Isorda Camp, I didn't interfere in the previous battle. But now you should stop, or else." Although he didn't finish his sentence, West, the man with the magic sword, had already sensed the threat and warning in his words. The other party's intentions were also very clear. The Isatar family was an old force that had been stationed in Isorda Camp for over 1,000 years. If the battle had gone smoothly, Ceolf, as the head of the patrol division, could naturally turn a blind eye to it. But now, it was obvious that the newcomer from the Crimson family had the upper hand. Weston, who was eager to turn the tables, had returned to the battlefield, causing this small-scale battle to escalate rapidly. With this, Ceolf, who was usually in charge of maintaining order in the camp, was now in an awkward position. The man with the demon sword Weston gritted his teeth, and finally said sternly, Is this your idea or the idea of the Lord behind you? What's the difference? The golden-skinned Magus Ceolf said coldly, Lord Aunaic has seen the battle just now. He asked me to pass a message to your Isatar family. Your family might have some sort of relationship with Lord Medusa, but in Asorda camp, he doesn't wish to hear the name Medusa ever again. This is Lord Aunaic's idea, and even more so, Lord Irenwald's. The true master of Asorda camp was the rank 7 great Magus Irenwald, and the rank 6 Aunaic was only one of his disciples. He was usually in charge of managing the camp's affairs. As a rank 7 great Magus like the Great Witch Medusa, Irenwald obviously did not wish to see an outsider meddling in his territory. Hence, even his disciple, Aunaic, seemed to reject everything related to the Great Witch Medusa. Hence, without any communication or interaction with the Isatar family, he suddenly mobilized a large Magus army to encircle a Magus family that had just joined the camp. Once such an evil example was started, it was easy for the order of the camp to collapse. Hearing the names of the two lords, Weston's expression stiffened, and he finally calmed down. He raised his left hand, gently turning the strange snake eye ring on his pinky, and gave a few instructions in a low voice. Under his instructions, the dark blood magi in the sky above Steel City finally heaved a sigh of relief, and began to slowly retreat from this sorrowful battlefield. After retreating into the darkness and doing a head count, the high-ranked magi from the Isatar family who had led the troops here could not help but feel a little dejected. After 2 days of sleepless battles, the Dark Blood Magus Legion of more than 3,000 people were now left with less than 1,000 people. Almost all of the remaining magi were injured. Many of them had broken limbs, and some even had half their bodies devoured by the violent energy attacks. This could be said to be the most serious injury the Dark Blood army had ever suffered. After a brief rest in the dark void, they quietly regrouped and returned to Exidar's camp. The Isatar family had their own Magus tower in the middle of the camp. Only with the help of the interplanar teleportation formation could they return to their original world and hide in their true nest to lick their wounds. Following the retreat of the Dark Blood army, the high-ranked magi who had occupied the surrounding dark void also left. After they returned to Asorda camp, news of the Isatar family mobilizing the Dark Blood army to ambush a new Magus family that had just joined the camp spread like wildfire, quickly spreading throughout the camp. This news brought shock to the various families in the camp. No matter what, the Isatar family could be considered an old force in Asorda camp. How could they be defeated by an unknown new sorcerer family? Hence, many busybodies could not help but search for all sorts of inside information and gossip. They also dug up some of the old secrets of the new Magus family. Sure enough, they managed to find a lot of interesting information in there. Chapter 1182. Magus World, the Blazing Flame Monarch. In that unique independent space, Grimm sat silently in front of the table, reading the Book of Wisdom. Now, he had already flipped to the 7th page. Every page he read brought him indescribable benefits and great reward. It was a pity that the Book of Wisdom had an owner. Before he got rid of the God of Wisdom, Jiro, he would not be able to completely subdue it and decipher the mysteries within. Hence, every time he read, it was a battle of wits and courage with his spiritual force. If he won, he would be able to decipher many fragments of high-ranked knowledge regarding the mysteries of the world and planes. Of course, it could also be knowledge of divine spells that he could not use at the moment. If he wanted to obtain more, he would need to constantly fight with the Book of Wisdom, continuously separating and analyzing the corresponding fragments of knowledge. He would then do his best to piece them together into a complete jigsaw puzzle of knowledge. If he failed, he would have to suffer the backlash of the Book of Wisdom, suffering a certain degree of damage to his spirit. Fortunately, this was a completely independent space, and the connection between the Book of Wisdom and the God of Wisdom was cut off. Hence, the backlash he had to bear was not unbearable. Even better, he had the AI chip's help. Even if he only separated a portion of the knowledge fragments, he could use it to compare with the Magus system and analyze many high-ranked secret knowledge that was useful to him. Hence, Grimm's spiritual undulations were abnormally frequent these days. His spiritual force would either explosively increase due to his gains, or he would become abnormally weak due to the backlash. Every day, he would hover between the peaks and valleys, suffering mental torture. However, with this stimulation, his spiritual force grew rapidly. It was precisely because his spiritual force fluctuated unpredictably that he did not dare to leave the blazing flame monarch easily, much less appear to fight others. Even when Mary was in danger in another world, and even when Steel City was attacked, Grimm had only sent out some reinforcements. He could not take the risk himself. After all, with his broken spiritual force, it would be difficult for him to fully recover without decades of meticulous nursing. Before that, he could not fight against any enemies of rank 4. After reading the 7th page of the Wisdom Bible seriously and meticulously, Grimm's heart jolted slightly. He quickly closed the book and left the alternate dimension in a hurry. As soon as he exited the alternate dimension, Grimm's body turned into a ball of fire and he appeared in another secret witchcraft room. The furnishings here were even simpler. There was only a grayish-white stone chair. Below the stone chair, the floor of the secret chamber was covered with densely packed and unusually complicated sorcery array glyphs. Grimm sat on the stone chair without hesitation and activated the spell formation beneath his feet. The entire secret chamber quickly dimmed, and with the projection and changes of the light and shadow in the glyph formation, a strange scene of another region appeared. This was a towering and majestic city. Leaning against the mountain, the buildings were built layer by layer, with distinct levels. All the buildings were made of stone blocks. Although they were simple and crude, they had a kind of rough and forceful grandeur. At the top of the tall stone platforms, an even taller and more magnificent mysterious palace sat at the top of the mountain, overlooking the majestic city below as well as the green forest around it that undulated like waves. The shadow fiend that Grimm's mental force was attached to was currently hiding in the crown of a tall ancient tree in the dense forest. Using the shade of the trees as cover, he looked at the giant demon city in the distance. "Master, we've found traces of Lady Mary. Should we go and meet up with her now?" The shadow fiend sent a mental message. Both of them were in 2 different dimensions. Only by using the power of the Wizard's Pagoda's glyph spell formation could they barely maintain the same flow of time and space and carry out simple mental communication. "There's no need to meet up with her. Let's go look for the winged serpent god directly," Grimm said decisively. Mary was actually very narrow-minded. Even if she knew that Grimm sent the shadow fiend here to care for her and protect her, as a blood lord who had many blood breeds under his command, she would definitely reject it deep down in her heart if she needed Grimm's help to take down a small totem god. Because of his understanding of Mary, Grimm did not plan to let the shadow fiend meet up with her. Of course, he had to help, but as for how he would help, Grimm planned to do it according to his own thoughts and rhythm. Under Grimm's command, the shadow fiend slipped into the darkness without hesitation, using the shadows to quickly sneak toward the giant demon city. The battle outside the giant demon city was still going on like wildfire. Mary led a large group of Blood Tribe members and the blood thralls she had just subdued, engaging in a crazy battle with the giant demon warriors and giant demon hunters deep in the forest. Every day, A large number of injured people would be carried out from the forest and sent back to the giant demon city for treatment. The terrifying plague was still spreading in the giant demon city. It had even infected nearly half of the giant demon civilians in the middle and lower levels. Grimm attached himself to the shadow fiend's mental consciousness. Through its eyes, he passed through the lower levels of the giant demon city. He saw the giant demon infected lying in the stone houses, wailing in pain. No matter if they were male or female, old or young, strong or weak, once they were infected, they could only be left alone in the stone houses, waiting for death to come. It was precisely because of the giant demon race's strong physique and tenacious vitality that they had to endure more pain and torture. Grimm even commanded the Shadow Fiend to sneak into a few stone houses and inspect some of the infected giant demons at close range. He then silently praised Mary. Although Mary was usually careless, a little crude, and had a bad temper, her talent in war was not bad. This was because Grimm had discovered the tendency to mutate in several of the infected, and the time was almost synchronized. This meant that Mary's battle with the giant demons on the periphery was actually just a delaying tactic. She was actually waiting for the full outbreak of the plague. In order to avoid alerting the giant demons too early, she even asked Remy to delay the outbreak of the early stage of the plague. According to Grimm's observation of the epidemic, the plague would break out in the entire giant demon city in 3 days. At that time, most of the giant demons would be killed by the plague, and half of them would turn into terrible servant corpses, causing a bloody massacre in the giant demon city. At that time, Mary would lead the blood kindred and drive the servant corpses into the nest of the feathered serpent god. This kind of tactic could indeed push the odds of victory to the highest possible level. In this regard, Mary had already made very appropriate arrangements. Even if Grimm came personally, there was nothing he could do to improve it. Therefore, he planned to think of a way to weaken the feathered serpent god's strength by himself. This could be considered as helping Mary from the side. The shadow fiend lurked in the darkness, jumping from one shadow to another, silently passing through the inner parts of the troll city. As it moved higher and higher on the platform, it saw that the giant demons were much better in terms of clothing and equipment than those at the lower levels. The higher it went, the fewer giant demons infected by the plague. Grimm even found strange cauldrons simmering with thick green broth in many places, the choking and pungent smell of herbs wafting out. Although this crude herbal broth could not completely kill the plague bacteria, it could effectively suppress their activity. This also reduced the contagion and outbreak rate of the plague. I didn't expect these witch doctors to have some tricks up their sleeves. Looks like I need to help them reduce their population. Grimm cursed silently as he guided the shadow fiend to leap through the shadows, silently searching for the leader of the witch doctors. As expected, in a mushroom hut on the highest platform, Grimm found a hunchbacked old witch doctor holding a strange wooden staff. The small and dim hut was filled with the thick smell of blood and pungent smell of herbs. A dozen giant demon women were quietly retreating. The blood of the giant demons' heads that had been chopped off were piled up together, looking strangely ferocious and terrifying. Next to the flesh and blood sacrifice were the twisted bodies of 5 ape men. Their throats had been cut open, and there were huge bloody holes in their chests. Their blood and hearts had been placed on the blood skulls, becoming the offerings to the great feathered serpent god. Right in the middle of the offerings, there was a long spear dripping with blood. The spear was shining with a strange 5-colored radiance that only a high-grade weapon could have. That old shaman, Yek, had just held the blood sacrifice ceremony for a whole day and night. At this moment, he was exhausted, lying on one side of the house. He kept taking out some pungent grass pancakes and poisonous scorpions with weird patterns on their bodies from a coarse clay pot beside him. After chewing for a few times, he straightened his neck and swallowed them. As soon as the shadow fiend that Grimm had possessed sneaked into the hut, the blood-dripping spear vibrated on its own despite the absence of wind, producing a crisp sound. The old witch Dr. Yek was stunned. He quickly scanned the hut with his murky yellow eyes, but he didn't find any intruders or anything unusual. Was it a false alarm from the sacred weapon? The possibility was not high. After all, the blood-dripping spear was a fourth-grade sacred weapon given by the feathered serpent god himself. It had all kinds of strange powers that others couldn't imagine. Therefore, Yek didn't dare to ignore its sudden warning. It was said that those intruders could turn into tiny red bats and spy for information. Could it be that there were enemies here as well? The old witch Dr. Yek snorted coldly. He pulled out a palm-sized puppet from his belt and threw it on the ground. Black smoke flashed, and a giant mosquito with strange patterns flew up from the ground. It was as big as a human head, and its sharp mouth and slim legs were shining with the sharp light of a sharp metal weapon. Chapter 1183. Along with the old shaman's screams, the giant mosquito flapped its transparent wings and turned into a stream of light. It quickly flew around the small house. With just a few flicks of its fingers, it had flown to every corner of the mushroom house. It didn't even let go of the dark corners. Unfortunately, it didn't find anything. Listening to the buzzing sound of the giant mosquito on his shoulder, Yek couldn't help but feel a little suspicious. Did the sacred tool sense wrongly? However, he had trained this giant mosquito himself. It was born with the ability to detect and sense any life aura. If there was an enemy nearby, the giant mosquito should have found it. The old shaman Yek couldn't help but mutter to himself because of all these contradictions. Yek used some small witchcraft to check again, but he still didn't find anything. Only then did the old shaman Yek confirm that the sound of the long spear was a false alarm. As for the reason, it could only be attributed to the mysterious and unpredictable god's will. Yek heaved a sigh of relief. He grabbed the giant mosquito and shook it slightly. Then, the mosquito turned into a wooden puppet. Hanging it on his waist, Yek stood up and stretched out his skinny arm. He wanted to pull out the long spear that was stuck in the sacrificial offering. However, as soon as he relaxed his mind, a strange black humanoid figure emerged from the dark shadow under his body. The sharp claws on his left and right arms silently pierced into the left side of his waist and the back of his head. Then, the claws started to vibrate inside. There was an enemy. The strong feeling of death shrouded Yek's mind. By the time it sensed the danger, the Shadow Fiend's attack had already landed on its body, and it exploded with full force. 2 flows of shadow power came out from the front of the sharp claws and exploded directly in Yek's heart and skull. Yek's life force was strangled in a blink of an eye. Yek didn't even have a chance to resist. His body trembled and then slowly softened. The shadow demon gently pressed on his body and sat him down. The shadow demon supported Yek's body and let it lean against the stone wall. Then, it closed its eyes, which were wide open in anger. Looking from afar, people would only think that Wizard Yek had fallen into a deep sleep due to exhaustion. Who would have thought that he had actually been assassinated? After setting up the scene, the shadow demon floated in the air and stored the bloody spear in the middle of the stone hall into his storage ring. Then, his body flickered and he snuck out of the mushroom hut. To create this Tier 4 shadow demon, Grimm had invested a lot of resources. Not to mention the storage ring, Grimm even threw the treasures of darkness that he had just obtained onto the shadow demon without any hesitation. Ring of Shadows, Breath of Darkness, these 2 Tier 4 magic tools were with the Shadow Fiend. Apart from that, Grimm also asked the Shadow Fiend to bring the Shadow Orb with him. It couldn't be helped. If he wanted to fight in the lair of an indigenous god, he wouldn't be able to suppress the situation if he didn't have something up his sleeves. However, killing a Grade 3 old geezer and obtaining a Grade 4 magic weapon was still a good deal. In any case, with the winged serpent god's strength, it would be impossible for him to create a higher grade magic weapon. Even the bloody spear in front of him was a Tier 4 sacred weapon that the winged serpent god had spent over 100 years of faith power to create. He had placed it with the old witch Dr. Yek to make it more convenient for him to descend. The winged serpent god had not stepped out of its lair for thousands of years. Usually, everything that happened in the troll nation was handled by the troll chieftain and Yek. The trolls would only pray to the winged serpent god when they encountered problems that they couldn't solve. This Tier 4 sacred weapon was what the winged serpent god relied on to project its power. With the power of the bloody spear, the winged serpent god could project its power outside of its lair. This way, it could radiate its power to every corner of the troll nation without leaving its lair. Of course, the premise was that the bloody spear was under the control of the trolls. Now that the bloody spear was in the shadow demon's hands, the winged serpent god would have one less weapon to use if it wanted to display its power. This was a good thing for Grimm, who wanted to cause trouble. The shadow fiend transformed into a dark shadow, constantly jumping and shuttling between the shadows. Sometimes it would hide behind a stone pillar, sometimes it would hide under a patrolling troll guard with a spear, and sometimes it would hide in the shadow of a flickering torch. No matter how small the shadow was, it could become a space for the shadow demon to reside in. Looking out from every angle of the shadow dimension, the world he saw was so strange and twisted. It was completely different from what Grimm had seen with his human eyes. This was something that Grimm found hard to accept with his human habit. However, the shadow demon seemed to be at ease. It was like a fish in water. Most of the time, the shadow demon would choose to reside in the shadow of a patrolling troll guard. Through a layer of hazy, illusory gray barrier, he would watch two black feet glide over his head. Then, he would observe the constantly shaking gray world through the gap between the troll's legs. This kind of vision and perception made Grimm dizzy. The shadow demon's innate potential in controlling the power of shadows was much higher than Grimm's. Hence, Grimm did not overstep his boundaries and personally control the shadow demon's body. Instead, he controlled its every action through small and large command. This time, the shadow demon did not infiltrate anywhere else. Silently, as long as there was a shadow in the entire space of the shrine, a slight ripple could not help but appear. Although the ripple was small, it could not escape the perception of the winged serpent god's spiritual consciousness. The moment the shadow energy rippled, the winged serpent god's main body's consciousness was sent over. The strange vertical pupils of the winged serpent god suddenly lit up, and a huge and surging spiritual consciousness instantly enveloped the entire temple, quickly calming the sudden shadow ripple. Was it a strange method created by an enemy, or was there something wrong with the shadow realm that affected this place? With all sorts of doubts, the winged serpent god's main body's consciousness turned into a dense giant net and quickly scanned the entire temple, but still did not find anything out of the ordinary. If there was no enemy, then there must be something wrong with the shadow realm that affected the material plane. In the past, the cautious winged serpent god would have definitely tried to extend its spiritual consciousness into the shadow realm to investigate the cause of the shadow energy ripple. However, long-term mental and physical exhaustion had made it lazy and tired. Moreover, as soon as it left, the little life in the giant egg in the mysterious lair started to become restless. This situation made the winged serpent god restless, and it did not bother to investigate the cause of the shadow energy ripple. It turned around and returned to its lair. Little did it know that the moment its main body's consciousness was projected and passed through the spatial singularity, a fellow that was even more adept at concealing his power had already openly slipped into its lair. Chapter 1184. A divine realm was not the same as a divine kingdom. A divine kingdom was the residence of a god, a divine space created by the gods of the world of gods using their majestic divine force. Every blade of grass, every stone, and every object in a divine kingdom was condensed from the purest source of divinity. Even the people inside were the souls of the most pious believers of the plane. After they died, the gods would guide their souls to the divine kingdom and use the omnipotent divine force to reshape their form. It was precisely because the relationship between a divine kingdom and a god was too close that it became a strange space for the gods to exercise their will and continue their divinity. To put it bluntly, a divine kingdom was the true body of a god, an indestructible and mysterious country used to protect their divine soul. A divine realm was countless times worse than a divine kingdom. Some gods who did not have enough divine force to open up an independent divine space in order to keep up appearances. They would cut out a plane from the material plane and use their divine force to separate it from the original world. Some of the more wretched gods did not even have the ability to infect the entire space with their divine force. It was enough for them to use their divine force to simply circle out a piece of land for their own use. Magi would look down on such a space and call it a divine realm. The god's domain that the feathered serpent god had created was the worst among all the god's domains. There was no divine power, no children of God, no beast transformation pond, no earthly temple, no Holy Spirit angel. The entire divine domain was exactly the same as the tropical rainforest of Hyzen Plain. There was not even the slightest trace of divine power. If not for the fact that he had just broken through the singularity, Grimm would have thought that he had fallen into a trap and was thrown into some forest by the Quetzalcoatl. The nature of the space here was no different from the outside world, so the Shadow Fiend did not have to adapt to the laws of space here. The Shadow Fiend turned into an erratic shadow once more, blending into the shadows of all living things as he slowly made his way to the core of the divine realm. On a winding path in the forest, a team of male feathered snakes with bright scales and tiny electric sparks flapped their wings and wriggled their wriggling bodies as they passed through the dense forest. In the area they patrolled, they could sense the terrifying aura of large carnivorous beasts. The bones of the beasts and piles of feces could be seen clearly. However, these ferocious beasts were clearly more afraid of the feathered serpent guards. As soon as they sensed the lightning aura that was about to be unleashed, they hurriedly hid far away, not daring to approach the patrol team at all. The forest was not big, but it was not small either. The wild beasts that lived in the forest were hunted down by the trolls in order to feed the feathered serpent god. As the totem of the troll clan, the feathered serpent god only needed to eat once a year. However, the amount of food it consumed each time was astonishing. Hence, the trolls had no choice but to capture all the large beasts in Digo Forest and keep them in captivity in this divine territory, waiting for the feathered serpent god to choose and enjoy. The periphery of the divine territory was filled with tropical jungles, where countless wild beasts and birds were kept in captivity. In the core area, there was an open-air shrine full of troll style. The number of feathered serpent guards patrolling the area had also increased. It was almost to the point where there was a sentry every few steps. However, without exception, they were all male feathered serpents. There were no females, nor were there any foreign races. Such feathered serpents were naturally enough to deal with ordinary intruders, but if they were used to deal with the miraculous Shadow Fiend, it would be no different from an uninhabited land. The Shadow Fiend leaped from one shadow to another as if there was no one around. He then followed the patrolling feathered serpent guards and wandered around the open-air shrine. There were long corridors made of huge rocks that weighed several tons everywhere, as well as feathered serpent statues standing on both sides of the corridors. However, these things obviously lacked enough manpower and servants to take care of them. Many of them had already been engulfed by weeds and spreading vines and moss. Wild beasts were wild beasts after all. Although they possessed a trace of divinity due to the gathering of faith power, the wild nature in their bones couldn't be extinguished. The entire divine territory was like a large zoo. One couldn't see the magnificence and beauty of the divine kingdom on earth, nor could one see the majesty and holiness of the divine kingdom. Even the air was filled with a foul smell. Obviously, ordinary feathered serpent guards couldn't set foot in the resting place of the feathered serpent god. Therefore, the Shadow Fiend escaped from the shadows of a team of feathered snake guards and flashed into the shadows of the corner of the long stone tunnel. Then, he stealthily crept towards the area with the thickest stench. It was an open-air shrine surrounded by huge rocks. Green rocks that were more than a meter tall and 3 meters long and wide were simply stacked together, leaving a vast space of nearly 10,000 square meters inside. At the end of the tunnel was a stone platform. On the platform there were all kinds of beast skeletons stacked on top of each other. At the center of the skeletons was a giant egg that was as white as jade. The feathered serpent god with white wings and light green snake scales lay behind the giant egg, using its long snake tail and thick wings to cover the giant egg. From time to time, it would spit tiny light blue lightning at the egg. The Shadow Fiend didn't approach the platform. Instead, he hid in the shadow of a tall stone pillar on the side of the corridor, silently observing and sensing the feathered serpent god on the stone platform. At this point, both Grim and the Shadow Fiend had turned off all active senses, leaving only some passive senses. They also narrowed their eyes into slits, only using the corner of their eyes to capture each other's position. They didn't look directly at the feathered serpent god. It couldn't be helped. Divine creatures were very vigilant. As long as danger befell them, divine power would send them danger warnings through various methods. Those more powerful divine creatures could even learn the source of danger and the vague process through divine power. Those with the innate ability of prophecy were even more terrifying. Even if its enemies were only plotting, planning, and had yet to carry out their actions. As long as the idea of harming it appeared in the enemy's mind, it would receive feedback of the world's danger, understanding and seeing through everything that might happen to it in the future. Fortunately, the feathered serpent god clearly didn't have the innate ability of prophecy, nor did it have the ability to see through the trajectory of fate. Otherwise, it wouldn't have tolerated a mortal sneaking into its kingdom, spying on it, and plotting a surprise attack. It wasn't easy to assassinate a god, even if it was just a native god, a totem god. Any slight movement could trigger the feathered serpent's divine power. No matter what, this was the divine territory's space, and it had the most suitable spatial characteristics for the feathered serpent god to unleash its powerful power. If the feathered serpent god was given enough time to arm itself, the importance of the divine territory's space to the feathered serpent god was no less than the importance of the wizard's pagoda to the wizards. Thus, under Grimm's guidance, the Shadow Fiend didn't rush to attack. Instead, he hid in the shadows and began to release the Shadow Pearl's power bit by bit. The feathered serpent god was only grade 4, while the Shadow Pearl was a grade 5 dark sacred weapon. In terms of power alone, the Shadow Pearl was much stronger than the feathered serpent god's lightning power. Thus, while the feathered serpent god was protecting the giant egg with all its might, the Shadow Fiend began to slowly but surely infect this space with its shadow power. The infection was slow and subtle, and any slight change would not be enough to alert the outside world. However, as the changes continued and continued, the shadow power in the open-air temple's area was also strengthened bit by bit. Darkness was everywhere, and the dark matter was the most infectious. When all things got used to the existence of darkness, it was also the time when the dark power would slowly invade the hearts of all things. The Shadow Fiend was like a demon hunter spider that was extremely good at weaving dark webs, silently and soundlessly spreading the dark power. And it was hiding in the deepest part of the darkness, silently watching its prey. It was waiting for a chance to distract the feathered serpent god, and this chance would come soon, because Mary's attack was about to begin. In the divine territory, the flow of time was unpredictable. 3 days passed quickly. As the divine territory was isolated from the outside world, Grim and the Shadow Fiend had no idea how the outside world was developing. However, they could still make some guesses based on the feathered serpent god's reaction. At some point on the 3rd day, the feathered serpent god, who was resting beside the giant egg with its eyes closed, suddenly opened its eyes. It raised its neck and let out a sharp howl that shook the entire divine territory. This howl was filled with anger, hatred, and the extreme violence of having its dignity repeatedly humiliated. The feathered serpent god could clearly sense that a large number of faith nodes in its originally sparse faith network were extinguished one by one. The pained wails and despair of the troll believers' prayers for protection surged into the feathered serpent god's mind, making its mood even more tyrannical. It wanted to kill. It wanted to tear those invaders apart. It wanted, as the feathered serpent god howled angrily, a large number of feathered serpent guards began to quickly gather, preparing to follow it into battle. As for the forest beasts in the divine territory, they all trembled in fear and hid in their nests, not daring to show their faces again. Chapter 1185. An enemy? A mysterious enemy had actually snuck into its bedroom and launched a surprise attack without it noticing at all. Such a rare occurrence had actually happened to it. The shock and astonishment it felt at the moment of being ambushed overshadowed its anger, leaving it at a loss for what to do. In the Hyzen plane, it was a god. It was the supreme ruler of the plane. No creature had ever dared to disobey its dignity, and no creature had ever dared to bare its fangs and brandish its claws in front of it. It had lived a comfortable life for so long that it had become a frog at the bottom of a well. It had truly thought of itself as a supreme ruler that could command the entire world and shake the plane with a proud roar. Little did it know that in the distant sorcerer world, even the real gods were divided into different levels in the sorcerer world's value system. In the eyes of high-ranked magi, a creature that was between a demigod and a true god was nothing more than a walking magus resource. In the knowledge of magi, the classification of gods, the analysis of divinity, the study of divine domains, and the analysis of divinity had already reached the pinnacle. Thus, a native god like it who thought of itself as high and mighty was only a slightly more advanced divine creature in the eyes of high-ranked magi. A divine creature was still a creature. Even if its divine soul was destroyed, it would still not be able to escape death. It was precisely because Grimm had such a deep understanding of divine creatures that he did not show the slightest bit of respect or leniency towards the winged serpent god. He immediately commanded the Shadow Fiend to use its ultimate move. Dark Summon plus Shadow Ambush plus Unlimited Shadow Arrows plus Sharp Stab. Dark Summon came from the Shadow Ring, and could summon a shadowy assassin. Shadow Ambush came from the Breath of Darkness Earring, and could condense a lightless dagger to continuously attack the enemy. As for the Unlimited Shadow Arrows, they came from the Tier 5 Shadow Orb. Only Sharp Stab was a physical attack from the Shadow Fiend's main body. With so many high-ranked spells erupting in an instant, even the winged serpent god with its demigod body found it hard to endure. In the blink of an eye, it was heavily injured by the storm of darkness attacks. However, even such a swift and violent attack did not kill it. The feathered serpent god could no longer be bothered with what was happening outside of the divine territory. Its broken serpent body suddenly straightened, and the raging waves of lightning that seemed like they could destroy the world instantly drowned out the open-air shrine. The violent and ferocious lightning storm wreaked havoc around its snake body, striking the exposed body of the shadow devil with crackling sound. Dazzling electric sparks and ear-piercing sizzling noises could be seen everywhere. However, this violent electric current that was enough to burn a Grade 4 creature into charcoal seemed a little weak when it landed on the Shadow Fiend. The strange metallic body had unparalleled magic resistance and damage reduction against elemental sorcery. Although the Shadow Fiend's body was almost transparent from the electric burns, it still didn't stop its sharp claws and feet from attacking crazily. Almost in the blink of an eye, the Shadow Fiend's claws and feet had entered and exited the Quetzalcoatl's body, almost turning it into a sieve. Damn it, it's a high-level golem. Although the feathered serpent god was arrogant, he wasn't stupid. He instantly identified the identity of the Shadow Fiend, and knew that using lightning power to deal with it would not work at all. It was easier to deal with this iron lump with a magic-resistant metal body by clashing head-on. The feathered serpent god let out a shrill cry and summoned the Quetzalcoatl guards outside. It pounced forward, using its sharp fangs, short and sharp front claws, and powerful tail whip to attack the enemy. Just as the divine territory was in a mess, spatial fluctuations overflowed from the entrance in the distance. Groups of terrifying servant corpses surged in like a tide and fought with the Quetzalcoatl guards that were waiting there. Mary, who was mixed in with the servant corpses, also took advantage of the situation to charge in. She fought with the feathered serpent god for a while, exchanging injury for injury. When it felt that the damage caused was severe enough, the shadow fiend's body flickered and left the battle, instantly disappearing into the endless darkness. The heavily injured feathered serpent god suddenly shivered, thinking that the other party was going to launch another terrifying sneak attack. It hurriedly condensed a violent lightning storm to protect itself, and then hatefully drowned the shadow killer and the lightless dagger with raging lightning waves. It had defeated 2 of the other party's helpers, but it still couldn't detect the other party. The feathered serpent god listened to the increasingly intense battle and killing outside the shrine. Its strange vertical pupils widened, and it was about to rush out to help. However, as soon as this thought came to mind, a black light shot out from the shadow of a stone pillar not far away, and its target was the giant egg that was completely defenseless. Bastard! The feathered serpent god hurriedly used its body to protect the giant egg, and it spat out lightning to annihilate the black light. Then, it flapped its wings and used its violent lightning power to smash the stone pillar and the shadow into pieces. Unfortunately, it got nothing. Bastard, you bastard, come out and fight me if you can. The feathered serpent god was furious, and it was no longer stingy with its lightning power. As violent thunderbolts fell from the sky, every stone pillar in the open-air shrine was smashed into pieces, and they collapsed into a pile of rubble. The feathered serpent god's body was blazing with lightning, illuminating every inch of the surrounding space as bright as day. It no longer gave the other party a chance to suddenly jump to its side. However, even with the physique and power of the feathered serpent god, using the power of lightning to such a degree still consumed an extremely shocking amount of individual energy. However, with the enemy in front of it, it couldn't care less. Without the help of the feathered serpent god, even if the hundreds of feathered serpent guards in the divine territory were all elites, it would be difficult for them to resist the impact of thousands of servant corpses. Moreover, those terrifying Blood Clan members were still hiding in the crowd of servant corpses, constantly launching sneak attacks. Under the situation where they were outnumbered and attacked as a group, the number of feathered serpent guards was also rapidly decreasing. At the edge of the divine territory, Mary and the old fox Venlier were fighting side by side, silently observing the situation in the space. They were also a little nervous. To be honest, this was the first time in their lives that they had broken into the kingdom of a god. They would be deceiving themselves if they said they weren't afraid and uneasy. However, no matter how much they prepared for the worst, and even prepared several plans to cut off their tails and escape, but the situation in front of them was clearly developing in the best direction for them. They had already fought their way to the enemy's doorstep, but the feathered serpent god was still calmly guarding its shrine, allowing its guards to be slaughtered by the enemy. What kind of situation was this? Could it be that it had gone mad? Or was there really something in the shrine that it couldn't give up? The old fox Venlier's eyes darted around. Obviously, he was also a little disturbed by the good situation in front of him. Only Remy, the plague spirit, and the old poisonous woman, who were following behind the two, seemed to be somewhat relaxed. Through the connection in their souls, Remy already knew everything the moment Grimm arrived in the Hyson plain. But under Grimm's instructions, he could only keep his mouth shut and pretend to be as ignorant as Mary. After a day and night of killing, the hundreds of feathered serpent guards finally fell under the siege of the army of servant corpses. After enjoying a feast of blood, the Blood Elf Mage Isa, a Tier 2 Blood Elf, finally advanced to Tier 3 with a sharp, ear-piercing shriek. As the Blood Master, Mary naturally wouldn't stop another of her subordinates from advancing to Tier 3. Correspondingly, as the strength of the many Blood Tribe subordinates skyrocketed, traces of pure blood energy gathered in Mary's body, causing her strength to rise along with the tide. She was getting closer and closer to that terrifying threshold. A bloody and hot aura rolled in Mary's heart, making her ruby-like crystal-clear eyes even more scarlet like blood. Mary flapped her delicate and small leather-like bat wings and slowly rose into the air. She stretched out her hand and pointed at the distant open-air shrine, shouting loudly, "The aura of blood, the aura of life! Attack!" Blood rage, following Mary's shout, all the servant corpses and blood thralls roared at the sky at the same time. Then, they all rushed towards the shrine without a care for their own safety. For a time, figures could be seen leaping over the ground, treetops, and rock walls. All the Blood Tribe members with sentience also felt their blood boil. Their vampiric fangs grew wildly in their mouths and protruded from their lips. They flapped their bat wings and followed closely behind the army of cannon fodder. They also began to rush towards the shrine. Sensing the arrival of the servant corpses and blood thralls, the Shadow Fiend opened its mouth and sucked in all the dark matter in the shrine. Only then did it quietly escape into the darkness. The feathered serpent god was slightly stunned. Before it could figure out why this mysterious enemy had escaped, thousands of beasts and people were running wildly in the distant tunnel. Strange beasts of all shapes and sizes rushed into the open-air temple, pouncing at it like an avalanche. "Bastard, a mysterious Tier 4 enemy made me so miserable. Now, it was the turn of a group of weak ants to come and take advantage of me." The enraged Quetzalcoatl god spread its broken wings and floated above the giant egg. Thunder and lightning erupted around its body, and a lightning storm that seemed like it could destroy the world instantly electrocuted the servant corpses and blood slaves that had rushed into the open-air shrine into piles of charcoal. However, not only did such an apocalyptic heavenly might not scare the enemy, but it also made them rush in even faster and fiercer. The nostrils that were spewing hot air, the twisted and hideous mouths that were opened to the extreme, and the ugly and ferocious figures. The feathered serpent god flapped its wings without hesitation and launched a few more lightning storms in succession, wiping out wave after wave of enemies. Finally, at the back of the gradually thinning army of cannon fodder, the feathered serpent god saw pairs of blood-red eyes and strange Blood Tribe members with hideous smiles on their faces. The dagger was revealed. At this moment there was no room for negotiation between the two sides. It was either you die or I die. Chapter 1186. The Shadow Fiend had left quietly. By the time it left, Mary and the others had already gained the upper hand on the battlefield. Although the vampires had suffered great losses, as long as they could take down the Quetzalcoatl, not only would Mary have a chance to advance to Grade 4, even the veteran vampires who had been languishing at Grade 2 for so many years would have a chance to advance. Therefore, the Shadow Fiend came quietly and left quietly on the eve of the end of an unparalleled war. Although some of the vampires, like Venlier, might have suspected why the Quetzalcoatl had been seriously injured before they had attacked, the Shadow Fiend had retreated silently. But under the clamor of a feast of blood, which vampire would be able to maintain a clear mind to uncover the truth behind the scenes? The Shadow Fiend was shuttling back and forth between the shadows, some connected, some independent, some big, some small. It was like a fish swimming in the vast ocean, unrestrained and free. It only took half a day to cross a distance of thousands of kilometers. However, when it arrived at the spatial singularity reserved for retreating from the Hyzen plane, the Shadow Fiend lay down quietly in the forest. The sun was shining brightly. A warm breeze blew through the forest. Green waves rose and fell, and the sound of crashing waves could be heard. In front of the spatial singularity that was so small that it was almost impossible to detect, A rolling black smoke was so eye-catching that it was impossible to ignore it. In the eyes of outsiders, it was just a cloud of black smoke, but to the shadow fiend and grim, it represented extreme danger. The aura within the smoke was so familiar. The shadow fiend could even see the tall and graceful figure at the core of the smoke with his night vision. Cough, as expected, the kind-hearted would be bullied. Ever since the shadow fiend knew that his soul had been damaged, his enemies had become active again. With boundless resentment, the shadow fiend emerged from the huge shadow cast by a tall ancient tree. He stared at the cloud of smoke and said faintly, "It's an honor to meet you here, esteemed Chief Circe." The smoke did not disperse, but quickly gathered together, condensing into a strange black armor that stuck to the body of the tall witch who had revealed herself. Dazzling sunlight poured down from the sky and shone on her jet-black body. No matter how bright and beautiful the sun was, it still appeared dim and hazy. It was impossible to see her facial features and skin clearly, and he could only barely make out a slender and beautiful figure. "You've improved again." In the darkness, Circe sighed and said, "It's only been a few days, and your mind power has improved again. Looks like we've really underestimated you. Your talent. To put it bluntly, you're the one with the most potential in the 700 years I've been a dark witch." A smile appeared on the shadow fiend's cold and hard metallic face. He looked around stealthily before his gaze once again landed on the other party. "Respected Chief Circe, you snuck into this alternate dimension and blocked my path just to say such senseless lies? Where are your subordinates? Why don't you call them out too?" In the darkness, Circe's laughter was cold and ethereal. "All right, legendary fire wizard Grimm, there's no need for you to probe any further. There's only you and me here today. There's no other dark witch." "Oh!" The shadow fiend rolled his eyes, clearly not believing the other party's words at all. "I didn't expect you to bring the Shadow Pearl around, even though you know that it's a holy weapon that we dark witches are determined to obtain. If you'd stayed in the wizard's pagoda, we might not have been able to do anything to you, but now—" At this point, Circe opened her hands, and two strangely shaped dark daggers slowly appeared. "Hand over the Shadow Pearl and I'll let you go. Otherwise—" The shadow fiend snickered, the sharp blades on his claws rubbing against each other, creating black sparks. "You'd better call your subordinates out and attack me together. It'll save us some trouble later. You don't have to probe me. I'm Circe, the leader of the Dark Tribe, and also the leader of the Dark Witches. I don't need anyone's help to fight a level 4 newbie like you." "Hee, could it be that you're worried that if too many people come, Alice will sense it?" The shadow fiend still had a mischievous look on his face. "You dark witches are indeed stubborn. You've clearly come to an agreement with Alice previously, but you still dare to come and cause trouble. Aren't you worried that I'll destroy this Shadow Pearl in a fit of anger?" "Humph, the Shadow Pearl is a holy weapon of darkness. As long as the Shadow World exists, it will never be destroyed. If you destroy it today, it will reform from the Shadow World in less than 100 years. Humph, ignorant man. Hee, even though I'm ignorant, I know. If this Shadow Pearl were to reform, would it still fall into the hands of you dark witches? Without it, can your dark development plan still proceed smoothly?" Within the shadows, Circe's eyes flashed with a black light. "Good, very good. I didn't expect an outsider like you to know so much about us dark witches. Today, I'll see if this dark puppet you've created can escape my pursuit." With that, the two dark figures disappeared at the same time, and appeared in another mass of black shadows 100 meters away. There was no shouting, no communication, and no probing. The two blurred figures constantly shuttled back and forth, the daggers and sharp blades in their hands clashing as they attacked each other crazily. But what was surprising was that despite the fiery attacks of the two, there was strangely not the slightest sound of metal clashing. The same techniques, similar skills, the two kings in the shadows, one advancing, one retreating, and the other chasing, launched an incomparably dangerous and silent strangulation. Sharp blades and daggers collided and clashed in the darkness. Sinister and strange shadow energy swirled up and down as the two used their skills, constantly blooming on each other's bodies, each time causing more or less damage to the other party. The greatest advantage of shadow energy was that it ignored defense and was corrosive. But when their enemy was also a big shot of the shadow world, these advantages were lost. In contrast, the one that could bring the greatest damage to the opponent was a physical attack. On this point, the Shadow Fiend undoubtedly had an absolute advantage. In the blink of an eye, after thousands of exchanges, both sides realized that the other party was difficult to deal with. With a shadow leap, they separated, each occupying a part of the shadows and coldly staring at each other. Taking advantage of this short moment of respite, the shadow energy quickly gathered and rapidly healed their injuries. Both were Grade 4 Kings of Darkness, and both had the highest resistance to darkness damage. As the Shadow Fiend had a magical body, it was practically immune to attacks from small sharp weapons, and its defense against physical attacks was also the highest. With the protection of the Shadow Orb, the other party's shadow witchcraft was completely ineffective against it. Even under such circumstances, Circe could still fight the Shadow Fiend to a draw. From this, one could see how profound her attainments in shadow witchcraft were. The Shadow Fiend's attack and defense were completely based on instinct. Although Grimm had rich combat experience, he couldn't even see the enemy's figure and movements in such a soundless and fast-moving environment. How could he guide the Shadow Fiend in battle? While the Shadow Fiend was deep in thought, he suddenly felt something strange below him. He looked down and discovered that there were several gray streams of air flowing out from the shadows beneath him. They were silently circling around his body like ropes? As soon as the thought appeared in his mind, the gray streams of air suddenly materialized and quickly coiled around his lower limbs. At the same time, Circe, who was hiding in another patch of darkness, let out a shrill cry. 5 strange runes shining with a dark purple light slowly appeared behind her. As Circe swung the dark dagger in her hand, the 5 strange runes flew into the dagger like birds returning to their nests. Immediately, the dagger shone brightly and became unstoppable. Seal of Darkness? Annihilation. The 3 artifacts on Circe's body lit up at the same time, quickly projecting their power onto her body. Circe's face, which was hidden behind the black fog, suddenly paled. Her right hand that was tightly holding the dark dagger instantly disappeared. Naturally, the Shadow Fiend could clearly sense such a large movement from his opponent. However, when it used the Shadow Orb's power to absorb the shadow substance, it transformed from ropes back into scattered air currents and freed its body. But it was too late. A black dagger appeared out of thin air and pierced deep into the Shadow Fiend's back. At the same time, the surging dark energy that came with the black dagger surged into the Shadow Fiend's body like a tidal wave. In an instant, a fist-sized bloody hole was formed. There was no blood. Thick and viscous shadow substance that looked like black liquid flowed out from the hole, mixed with many shimmering fragments of magic equipment. Through the bloody hole, one could see that the Shadow Fiend's body was filled with densely packed mechanical parts and gear hubs of various sizes. After suffering such a heavy blow, these parts that were originally operating in an orderly manner were now in a mess. Creaking sounds could be heard as parts of the parts flew out continuously. What a terrifying attack! Based on the strength of this compound attack, it was probably at least 5,000 degrees. With this kind of attack, even if it was a Dragon Slayer, there was a high chance that it could heavily injure a Grade 4 giant dragon. If the Shadow Fiend did not have outstanding physical and dark resistance, it would have been insta-killed by an ordinary Tier 4 Magus. Grimm, who had his consciousness attached to the Shadow Fiend's body, broke out in a cold sweat. He hurriedly commanded the Shadow Fiend to escape. Before escaping, the Shadow Fiend was rather straightforward. He cast almost all of the high-ranked shadow spells he could instantaneously cast on Circe, before fleeing in a flash. Although the Grade 4 Shadow's Lair and Lightless Dagger could not do anything to the Dark Witch leader, they could still delay her for a while. Chapter 1187. The Magus World, the Blazing Flame Monarch. It was still the same secret room. Grimm let out a long sigh and slowly retracted his consciousness from the other world. The battle in the distance had just begun, and it would not be easy for Shadow Fiend to escape from Circe's pursuit. However, with Grimm's knowledge and experience, it would be extremely difficult for him to be of any use in this battle between the Lords of Darkness. As such, he simply let go of everything and gave Shadow Fiend all the autonomy. With the Hyzen Plain as their battlefield, it would be difficult for this battle to end in a short period of time. After letting go of his worries about Shadow Fiend, Grimm calmly pondered over the development of the Crimson family, and he could not help but feel a trace of worry. In the foreseeable future, after the great victory in the Hyzen Plain, the vampires would definitely welcome a wave of advancement. Amongst the large factions of the Crimson family, the vampires would rise as well, suppressing the other branches and becoming the core of the family. While this was not necessarily bad, it would obviously cause the development of the family to be biased. The only faction that could contend against the vampires was the mutant brain, Gazaruvi's faction. Having gained a firm foothold in the Outlands, and with the help of the Golem Dragon, Steel City's power had increased exponentially. Their strength was no weaker than the vampires. However, the mutant brain Gazaruvi's loyalty was limited. He could be of great use, but Grimm found it difficult to put him in an important position. If it wasn't for the danger in the outer region, if it wasn't for the fact that he had some clues about the ultimate weapon of the Crimson family, Grimm would rather lose the Steel Capital than send that puppet dragon into Gazaruvi's embrace. With the rapid rise of these two factions, the goblins and human magi seemed to have fallen behind. As for the elders, who had followed Grimm to conquer other dimensions and helped the Crimson family rise to power, they had all been reduced to second-rate or even third-rate members. This was something that made Grimm sigh in admiration. As the patriarch of the Crimson family, Grimm had no choice but to consider the future of the family. At this moment, only he, the clan leader with a transcendent status, had the qualifications to suppress the two irrepressible inner desires of the two clans and tilt the clan's resources towards the weaker clans. This was the only thing he could do. After all, sorcerers were born to pursue the strong. All the resources and power would naturally gather in the hands of the strong. The stronger the vampires and Steel City were, the more resources, materials, knowledge, and talents within the clan would be drawn to them. This was also an internal survival of the fittest outcome. Under such circumstances, the weak had no power, status, or right to speak. Therefore, in order for the family to develop in a balanced manner, Grimm had to pick out some powerful wizards from the goblins and human wizards, allowing them to successfully transition into the core circle of the Crimson family. In this aspect, Grimm had a few good candidates in mind. In the goblin camp, Kirby, Loke, and Dacilla were the most outstanding ones. LaSalle and that Gunga. Among them, Kirby was the old man who had followed Grimm for the longest time and was the most loyal. However, this fellow's innate talent was very average. Even after eating many high-grade potions and rare treasures, he had only barely managed to reach high-grade rank 2. Without external help, he would never be able to advance to rank 3 on his own. Magician Loke was an influential figure, who had suddenly appeared in recent years. With his extraordinary innate talent, he was now a high-grade rank 2 magician. Moreover, according to the AI chip's calculations, his potential was at mid-grade rank 3. This meant that with proper nurturing, Loke could easily become a rank 3 magus. A tier 3 sorcerer was nothing to the current Grimm, but Grimm was not a threat to him. He could destroy them with a flick of his finger and destroy them with a wave of his hand. However, to any magus family, a rank 3 magus was still the core of their main fighting force. In the various magus family wars, the main force was still those powerful rank 3 magi. As for rank 4 magi, they were basically the core of the family. If they were to be mobilized, it would usually mean a bloodbath or an extermination of the family. Hence, to any Magus family, having another rank 3 Magus was a matter worthy of celebration. As for the remaining 2 goblins, the leader of the violent blood group, Drusilla, LaSalle, and the dean of the Goblin Research Institute, the leader of the demonized goblins, Gunga. Strictly speaking, their innate talent was not worth mentioning. The leader of the violent blood group was only at the peak of rank 1, and it was already difficult for him to advance to rank 2. After all, the so-called goblin mechanical warlocks were just a bunch of goblins who had some innate talent in the elements and could skillfully control magic machinery. They did not have enough innate talent and could only rely on numbers to win. They were the typical cannon fodder profession. Even so, there was not a single talent that Grimm would look at in a different light. As for the leader of the demonized goblins, Gunga, he was a genius in research and was not good at fighting or management. Hence, he was only at high-grade rank 1. Moreover, this seemed to be the limit of his potential. Hence, after much consideration and considering the best use of resources, Grimm decided to groom Cabby and Loke. After studying the goblins, Grimm turned his attention to the human magi. Strictly speaking, the native magi of the Crimson family were both successful and unsuccessful. There were quite a number of outstanding native magi. Merrill, Gargamel, and Bliss occupied the core positions of the family. However, only Bug Lich Bliss was a combat magus, while the other 2 were more focused on managing the family's affairs. Apart from that, the native magi that the Crimson family had nurtured were mostly rank 1 magi. It was impossible to even find a rank 2 magus. Hence, their authority in the family was rather low, and they were the ones being controlled by the family. They were unable to enter the ranks of the rulers. However, to put it bluntly, it was precisely this group of native magi that had a lower status within the Crimson family that could be considered the orthodox magus system. If the Crimson family had too many foreign races and the native human magi were too few, then in the eyes of the other magus families, they would at most be an external force. It would be difficult for them to be seen as one of their own. This was undoubtedly detrimental to the long-term development of the Crimson family. As long as Grimm was in the family, this problem was not too obvious. But once Grimm left the family, the future development of the family would be in jeopardy. Regarding this problem, one could refer to the few foreign races in the central continent. Whether it was the small storm giant kingdom or the few vampire families, they were all under the vigilance of the other magus families. If their families wanted to develop or colonize some secular territories, they would face the combined efforts of the surrounding magus families. It was so difficult to even take a step forward. The Crimson family that Grimm had established was facing the same problem. The solution was obviously to increase the number of native magi within the family. In this regard, Grimm had also picked out a few good candidates: the Red Dragon Magus Merrill, the Insect Magus Bliss, and the Demoness Amelia. The Red Dragon Magus Merrill was his disciple, and there was no problem with her loyalty. Her innate potential had also increased by leaps and bounds after obtaining the Fire Dragon bloodline. As long as the dragon resources the Crimson family had obtained in the Lance Plane were tilted towards her slightly, nurturing Merrill to grade 3 would not be a problem. The Demoness Amelia was the best candidate to replace Gargamel. Gargamel's innate potential was low. Even with Grimm's preferential treatment, his innate potential was limited to grade 2, and there was no possibility of him advancing to grade 3. In comparison, the daughter he had with the forest demon Ava, Amelia, had extraordinary potential. At such a young age, she was already a high-grade grade 2 plant magus. As for the shadow of the demon's poor princess that shrouded Amelia, after Alice's evaluation, she was no threat to the Crimson family. That was why Grimm was bold enough to make use of this rare talent. The insect Magus Bliss was an elder that Grimm had placed at the end of his consideration. He was excessively cruel and bloodthirsty, and his actions were abnormally evil. The Magus bloodline he had chosen was even more bloodthirsty and unbearable. Even when Grimm used him, he was often worried that he would not be able to control the strange insect queen, and would instead be completely assimilated into a non-human insect. As if sensing Grimm's worries and bottom line, the insect queen did not dare to completely devour Bliss's soul, no matter how great of an advantage it had. This caused the human soul and the insect queen's soul to constantly be in a strange state of conflict and harmony. This was the main reason why insect Magus Bliss could not advance. Hence, in order to help Bliss advance, Grimm had to find a way to completely fuse Bliss's soul with the insect queen's. Moreover, the fusion would be led by Bliss's human soul, and not the insect queen's one-sided devouring. To achieve this, the difficulty was undoubtedly extremely high. In the past few days, although insect Magus Bliss had asked Grimm for help many times, Grimm had been too busy, so he had put this matter aside. Now that his soul was injured and he was recuperating in the family, he had more time and energy to pay attention to the internal affairs of the family. Hence, he now had to deal with all the matters that had been delayed for a long time. The hard work of the family members had saved him a lot of trouble in managing the family's affairs, and also helped him gather a lot of wealth and resources. Chapter 1188. The Shadow Fiend returned to the Blazing Flame Monarch on the 11th day after parting ways with Grimm. Though it had successfully brought back the Shadow Pearl, its injuries had reached a ghastly level. Fortunately, Grimm had added a large amount of memory metal when he'd created the Shadow Fiend's body. Thus, the Shadow Fiend could completely repair the damage on its body with the help of a sea of shadow energy. The vampires who'd gone on an expedition to the Hyzen Plain returned to their base on the 17th day. The moment they returned, the Crimson family was in an uproar. Following them were a large number of people who'd become high-ranked vampires. Without a doubt, Mary had advanced to rank 4, turning the Crimson family into a family of super magi. If Alice was included, then the Crimson family had the potential to become an independent force. This news had yet to spread, but once it reached the scattered forest of towers, a new wave of unrest would be unavoidable. Of course, apart from Mary, the Blood Lord who'd advanced to rank 4, 2 other Blood Elves in Hyzen's group had also advanced to rank 3. They were the Blood Elf Wizard Isa and the Blood Elf Shapeshifter Spara. As for the other vampires, they'd more or less advanced as well. It was just that they hadn't advanced by a large rank like the 2 of them. Since the Hyzen Plain had already become the private property of the vampires, Mary had taken the initiative to subjugate and enslave a large number of native trolls. She had them work day and night, transforming the former capital of the trolls into a massive castle of blood. It had become a stronghold for the vampires. The former nest of the winged serpent god, which was the divine domain, had been dug out and turned into a giant blood pond. As long as the vampires worked hard, the ancient blood castle would become the holy land of the vampires, and the blood pond would become the origin of the high-ranked vampires. However, this was all for later, and Mary and the others had to put their heart into it. The good thing was that Mary and the other vampires had also brought back a large number of spoils of war. Among them, there were many good things that even Grimm's eyes lit up. Mary left everyone behind and barged into Grimm's Blazing Flame Monarch. In an alchemy laboratory, Mary grabbed Grimm's collar and pulled him in front of her, scrutinizing him carefully. During this period of time, have you gone far away? Grimm furrowed his brows as he was baffled by the situation. What are you talking about? Why are you going on a long journey? Let me ask you this. Have you ever been to the Hyzen Plain? Mary threatened, baring her canine teeth. The Hyzen Plain? Why would I go to Hyzen Plain? Grimm's face was blank. You know that my soul source hasn't recovered yet. How can I go out and run around? At such a close distance, Grimm's words weren't false at all. His soul origin did not match his Tier 4 status. It was too weak and unstable. Could it be that the stinky snake suffered a terrible backlash because of the large number of believers dying? Otherwise, there was no reason for it to be half dead when they attacked its lair. Such a profound question was obviously not suitable for Mary to think about. She had only thought about it for a moment, and a series of little stars had already appeared in the depths of her beautiful blood-red eyes. It was obvious that she was in the stage where her mind was in chaos and her rationality was collapsing. If she couldn't figure it out, then there was no need to think about it. Only Mary could confidently carry out such a simple and crude solution. After giving up on thinking, Mary quickly regained her rationality and clarity. Her face instantly bloomed with a sweet smile that could kill a person. "You're a Tier 4 and so am I. How about it? Let's go have another round and see?" Faced with such a self-torturing suggestion, Grimm was naturally duty-bound to reject it. Mary immediately beamed with joy. "All right, I won't tease you anymore. You should just stay here and recuperate. You're my woman from now on. If anyone dares to bully you, just tell them my name, and I'll take care of them for you." After saying that, Mary raised her clean neck and let out a complacent, queen-like laugh. He was so proud of himself for suppressing Grimm, but it also made him roll his eyes and speechless. "All right, I won't tease you anymore. These are the spoils of war that I've brought back for you this time. Sign here and receive them." After Mary had enough of teasing him, she vented out the suffocating feeling of being oppressed for nearly 100 years. With a wave of her hand, she released a large pile of spoils of war from her storage ring. "Take your time, I still have to pay a visit to that gentle and cute sister, Alice." When she said the word sister, Mary gritted her teeth. The age of a magus was very difficult to calculate. Between Mary and Alice, who was the older sister and who was the younger sister, was a complete mess. No one could figure out who was the older sister. Hence, with the magus world's habit of respecting the older sister, the stronger one would be the older sister. No matter how unconvinced the other party was, her strength was still there for all to see. She had no choice but to lower her head. Because of this, Mary's rank had always been slightly lower than Alice's, so she had to sullenly stay as the younger sister for a long time. To be honest, the nameless fire in her heart was about to burn through the sky. Right now, she and Alice were both at the beginning of the 4th rank, so their ranks were the same. However, because she was a combat witch, she was more respectable than Alice, who had no combat power. Hence, it was only natural for her to be in charge of the two of them. This time, she finally had a chance to become the older sister. If she didn't go and show off, she might really get sick from holding it in. Therefore, after messing around with Grimm for a while, Mary suddenly gave him a light peck on the lips and left with her head held high and left like the wind. Grimm didn't know whether to laugh or cry until Mary's aura disappeared from the blazing flame monarch. Only then did he look at the spoils of war she had left behind. The corpse of the winged serpent god, 11 lightning-type divine force crystals, a source substance that hadn't been contaminated by any foreign energy, as well as that giant egg. Although there weren't many spoils of war in front of him, Grimm's heart suddenly burned with passion. It could be said that Mary and the others had risked their lives and paid a huge price for the spoils of war. Almost 80% of the essence was concentrated in these few spoils of war. This meant that Mary had only extracted the blood from the winged serpent god's corpse and sent the rest of the valuable things to Grimm. Did Mary not understand the value of these spoils of war? Ignoring everything else, just that piece of sapphira was something that the Quetzalcoatlus had extracted from the Hyzen Plains source energy. In order to prevent it from being contaminated by foreign energy, the winged serpent god had used the power of faith to store it. Such a pure, natural source substance was obviously much better than the ones in the Magus world that used elemental or non-elemental crystals to store it. If he were to convert it, This source substance in front of him would be worth more than 3,000 Sith. Grimm had risked his life to participate in a bloody battle between peak rank 3 Magi, but he had only obtained 500 Sith. If Grimm was lucky enough to obtain 2 of these source substances, his path to rank 5 would be smooth. The only thing he needed to do now was to meditate day after day to increase his spiritual force. As long as his spiritual force reached a certain level, his advancement to rank 5 would be a piece of cake. Everything would happen naturally. Unfortunately, there was only one source substance in front of him. He would have to find the other half in the next few hundred years. This was the only thing that most rank 4 Magi were concerned about. Grimm carefully put away the source substance and began to examine the other spoils of war. The corpse of the winged serpent god, although the divine blood had been extracted and the vitality of the body had decreased, its value was still indescribable. The winged serpent god was once a rank 5 earth god. After all, this Quetzalcoatl was once a tier 5 earth god. Although it had fallen to tier 4 due to giving birth, its physical body's immortal attribute was still there. If the extraction method was reasonable and the method was gentle, this immortal attribute could be transferred. The so-called immortal attribute could only be possessed by high-grade creatures. The high-grade creatures here referred to extraordinary creatures that were rank 4 and above. Creatures with an immortal body would not die from any natural causes. They would not age, and they did not need to sleep, breathe, or eat. Even if they were in a sealed environment with zero magic, they could live for thousands of years without rest, forever maintaining their original state. The reason why rank 4 body refinement Magi did everything they could to refine their bodies into an immortal body was because of this. Only peak grade 4 body tempering sorcerers could achieve such a feat. Therefore, the value of an immortal body to a magus could be imagined. If Grimm did not walk the path of an elemental magus, this immortal body would probably be an unparalleled temptation to him. As for the slight changes to the body, it could be slowly adjusted through spells or simply continued in a non-human form. To be honest, among the high-grade Magi, there were not many who could maintain their human form. Although a lot of Tier 4 sorcerers usually looked kind and amiable, once they revealed their true form in battle, their appearance was as scary as it could be. Let's not talk about others, let's talk about Grimm. Grimm's true battle form was a terrifying flame giant that was more than 10 meters tall. Only such a form could accommodate the golden flames spewing out from the heart of law, and only such a form could fully display the terrifying might of a legendary fire magus. As for his usual human form, it could be said to be a disguise or a low magic state. Chapter 1189. After putting away the origin substance and the winged serpent god's corpse, Grimm's gaze fell on the divine force crystals. Divine force crystals sounded no different from magic crystals. They were just the condensation of some kind of element or energy. However, the magical crystals only gathered magical energy that could be sensed everywhere in the world. Divine force crystals, on the other hand, gathered divine force that was extremely rare and precious. Just like how water was a liquid and ice was a solid, divine force crystals were actually strange crystals formed from the condensation of highly concentrated faith power. In a natural state, it was impossible for faith power to condense naturally. Only those gods who used divine power to gather the power of faith could change their physical form and form such a strange crystal. This also meant that every divine power crystal contained a trace of the god's divinity. These things were quite valuable to Magi. Unable to figure out the use of these divine force crystals for the time being, Grimm casually put them away. Just like that, the only thing left in front of him was the rather exaggeratedly shaped giant egg. Just as he approached it, before Grimm could even probe it with his spiritual force, the giant egg shook, and a shrill and ear-piercing mental language came from within. Logically speaking, with the characteristics of the mental language, even creatures from different planes and races could communicate smoothly. However, this mental language couldn't express the slightest bit of complete consciousness. It only transmitted a feeling of anger and hatred. At the same time, a thin bolt of lightning struck down, striking Grimm's head. The lightning was golden in color, and its power was not shocking. It seemed to only have a radius of 100 or 200 degrees. Although this bolt of lightning did not harm Grimm in the slightest, it caused his long hair to flutter and his entire body to feel numb. It was a very strange feeling. The power of laws, Grimm could not help but feel astonished. A little fellow that had yet to fully develop its own consciousness and was still in the embryonic stage, had already grasped a portion of the power of the laws of lightning. It was obvious that the winged serpent god had spent a lot on nurturing this little fellow. In that case, the divine force crystals and the origin substance were also prepared for this little fellow. The offspring of divine creatures would probably possess a portion of divinity the moment they were born. Even if it was just an embryo inside the egg that had yet to take human form, it already possessed a terrifying might that was not weaker than a Tier 1 magus. At the very least, a Tier 1 wizard's chain lightning would not be able to harm Grimm at all, yet this little fellow could make him feel a trace of numbness. What should they do with this huge egg? Hatch it. As soon as this idea appeared in Grimm's mind, he rejected it. The consumption of resources to cultivate divine creatures was not something he could bear now. Grimm wasn't willing to use the divine power crystals and origin substance on this egg. Without the feathered serpent god's nourishment and care, it would be extremely difficult for the egg to continue incubating. Break the eggshell and devour the flesh and blood inside? To be honest, this idea had always been tempting Grimm. Ever since he converted to the Star Beast bloodline, Grimm had been drooling over the flesh and blood of high-level creatures. Their flesh and blood, their souls, everything about them was a kind of nourishment to the Star Beast bloodline. In order to affect Grimm's Star Beast bloodline, the high-level creature had to be at least rank 4. This meant that the flesh and blood of magic beasts below rank 4 had almost no effect on Grimm. Grimm's daily meals could only satisfy his cravings. If he wanted to eat to replenish his energy and stamina, only those rank 4 magic energy meals could do so. However, rank 4 magic beasts were extremely rare even in the Magus world. Unless it was a powerful Magus family, who would eat the flesh and blood of a rank 4 magic beast so easily. Of course, there were still a few rank 4 dragons in the Lance Plain. However, none of them were easy to deal with. Even if Grimm was at his peak, he would not have complete confidence in dealing with even one of them. Not to mention that these fellows all had groups of subordinates, and their own battle prowess was outstanding. They were not as easy to deal with as lone rank 4 magic beasts. At this thought, Grimm could not help but narrow his eyes as he began to ponder. Perhaps he could spread some news within the scattered towers and purchase information on the locations of the rank 4 magic beasts in the dark forest. Then, he could gather his family's manpower to encircle them. This would become a daily routine that he would have to do for a long time to come. As for devouring this giant egg, it would definitely benefit Grimm's bloodline. However, it felt like a reckless waste of a heavenly treasure. Perhaps there was a better and more complete method. At this thought, Grimm could not help but order, AI chip, search for the method to use this giant egg. Beep. Mission accepted. Searching for data, as expected, the information that the AI chip found covered hatching, devouring, blood sacrifice, breeding and many other aspects. The most cost-effective method was to hatch this little feathered serpent and nurture it into a terrifying divine creature. However, this process would take up to 1,000 years, and it would require the consumption of all sorts of precious resources. In truth, Grimm did not have the confidence to wait until this little feathered serpent matured. The other method was to use the blood sacrifice method, using the strange bloodline of the little feathered serpent to nourish Grimm's body. According to the AI chip's calculations, if everything went smoothly, not only would Grimm be able to repair the damage to his soul, He would also be able to increase the potential of his vitality and bloodline. Hence, Grimm did not hesitate at all and chose the blood sacrifice method. Following Grimm's choice, the AI chip immediately projected a list of items in his mind. These were all necessary resources for the blood sacrifice ceremony. Grimm took out a blank spell scroll and placed it on his forehead, etching the list of items into it. He then drew a line with his finger, and a dense red light tore a small hole in the space. Only then did Grimm stuff the spell scroll into it. While he was doing all this, Gargamel, who was in the Crimson Wings Wizard's Pagoda, far away in the Alovis region, was crouched in front of a desk and writing furiously. Amelia and Aiwa accompanied him by his side, helping him deal with many family affairs. Suddenly, a cluster of red light appeared above his head and tore a small hole in the space. Then, a magic scroll with flashing red runes fell on his desk. "These are the items I need recently. Collect them and send them to the Blazing Flame Monarch as soon as possible. If you find anything difficult to find, remember to report it to me." As soon as the Gargamel touched the flame rune on the scroll, Grimm's deep and dignified voice came out. Following which, the witchcraft scroll unfurled and a dense array of words was projected out. 1 Tier 4 Soul Altar, 30 grams of hops. A set of high-rank spirit-shifting tools, 1 soul fixation crystal, row after row, row after row, almost all of them were top-notch Magus resources that were extremely hard to find. Even with Gargamel's vast experience over the years, he had only heard of many resources and had never seen them before. Thus, the moment he received the list of items, he frowned, his face full of hesitation and awkwardness. "What's there to be embarrassed about?" Amelia maintained a calm expression. "It's not like the family master doesn't know where our family's resources are. If there are any, send them over first. If there aren't, borrow them from the other families." Hearing his daughter's explanation, Gargamel felt slightly more at ease. "Give Meryl a copy of this list as well, and we'll try our best to gather the resources. Since the family master has said so, he must be in urgent need of them. I'll pay a visit to those few rank 4 organizations." "No, father. Don't be in such a hurry." Amelia's eyes turned, and she could not help but smile sweetly. "Lady Mary has just advanced to rank 4, so our family will definitely hold a celebration. Let this news spread first, and pay them a visit on the eve of the celebration. The prosperity of our Crimson family is obvious to anyone with a discerning eye. When the time comes, do you still have to worry about not being able to borrow these resources?" Gargamel pondered for a moment, and then nodded in approval. As the news of Mary's advancement spread, the Magus world in the Terran region was once again thrown into turmoil. This time, let alone the small and mid-ranked Magus families, even the dozen or so rank 4 organizations could not sit still. Among them, no one was more excited than the vampire families. In the central continent, there had not been a rank 4 vampire for thousands of years. Thus, be it the slightly famous vampire families or the vampire magi who lived in seclusion, they could not control their restless blood and rushed to the Crimson family. In less than a month, there were already 4 vampire families that submitted to Mary, and the Crimson family now had 6 rank 3 vampires. Of course, before they submitted to Mary, these vampire families all had their own territories in the Terran region. Thus, with the emergence of small enclaves, the Crimson family's influence quickly spread to 5 regions. The vampires also quickly rose to become the most tyrannical group within the Crimson family, and they had the most potential to develop. An ordinary Magus family actually had 2 rank 4 magi at the same time, and the relationship between these 2 rank 4 magi was not ordinary, and it was very likely that they were a couple. In truth, after hearing this news, all the rank 4 organizations in the central continent felt an oppressive aura. As a family Magus who had abandoned the darkness for the light from the Crimson family, AM was naturally very sensitive to such news and information, and paid extra attention to it. When the Crimson family was besieged by many Magus clans, the Magi around him all congratulated him, praising his decision to leave the abyss of misery as soon as possible. However, when the news of the Crimson family's victory came, his companions all fell silent. This was especially so when that terrifying Grimm actually crushed Lord Senazar in a competition. This caused Grimm to suffer a huge mental blow. After returning to his family after the battle, he hid in his residence and did not show his face again. Meanwhile, after the Crimson family rose to power and became a Tier 4 power that everyone paid attention to, an oppressive atmosphere enveloped AMU's surroundings. As a result, AMU's every move had to be criticized by those with ulterior motives. In private, AM had secretly gathered internal information about the Crimson family. However, when he found out that the gentle and shy Meryl had become a red dragon and was now at the peak of Grade 2, with a high chance of advancing to Grade 3, AM lost control of his emotions and smashed everything in his residence that could be smashed. Meryl, that little girl with freckles on her cheeks, who did not even dare to speak loudly in front of her companions, had reached such a level, and he, who was once Grimm's disciple, was now just a little middle grade 1 Magus. The huge difference in strength and status between the two deeply pierced AM's heart, which he thought had long since calmed down. More than once, AMU hid in the house and yelled, cried, and laughed. He knew very well that out of the 5 quasi-magi who had followed Grimm, only he and Meryl had successfully advanced to become magi. Between him and Meryl, only he had the same affinity with the fire elemental energy. He was the one most likely to inherit Grimm's legacy. Even if he did not succeed, he would still be by Grimm's side. At the very least, he would be on par with Meryl and become a powerful Magus that many Magi clan leaders would have to be respectful to. However, all of this had gone up in smoke because of that misstep. Now, he had become the enemy of the Crimson family and a joke in the Cerubo family. This had caused AM, who had always wanted to become stronger, to endure even more mental torture and pressure. He had thought about it more than once. If he had not betrayed Grimm, if he had not been coerced by Magus Forgan to become a spy for the Crimson family, then he would definitely still be enjoying the limitless glory of the Crimson family, enjoying the endless resources of Magi, and the countless magic crystals. Just his identity as Grimm's direct disciple would allow him to enter the core circle of the Crimson family and enjoy a position and power that far surpassed the Red Dragon Magus Meryl. If even that weak Meryl could advance to the peak of rank 2, then he, who was even more talented as a Magus, might have already advanced to rank 3 and become a powerful Magus worshipped by tens of thousands of Magi. Whenever he thought of that glorious scene, whenever he thought of that high-spirited scene, AM's heart would become restless and furious. Every night, he would have to crazily stab his thigh with a steel needle in order to break free from that huge disappointment and overwhelming regret. However, he could not reveal any of his madness and loss of composure in private. Even within the family, he had his own competitors and enemies. If he showed any dissatisfaction towards the family, only God knew what kind of punishment and reprimand he would receive from the higher-ups of the family. When he was at a loss, he had once abused the female acolytes under him. He was even afraid that they would spread his sleep-talking, so he had no choice but to get rid of them in secret. From then on, all the female acolytes in the family feared him like a tiger, and no one dared to easily get close to him. Just one more turn and he would reach the main entrance of the Hall of Knowledge. Amen, who was walking silently, suddenly heard some noise from the corridor. Big news. Big news. Did you guys hear? The Crimson family has produced another rank 4 Magus. What? How is that possible? Do you really think a rank 4 Magus is blueberry grass? You can find one just anywhere. TCH. It's true, it's true. This is the news I just heard from the family's communication tower. The male acolyte who was widely questioned was short and fat. His face was flushed red as he shouted and gestured with his hands, as if he was indignant at everyone's doubts. However, his hoarse voice did not cause his companions to gather around and question him. Everyone took a step back with pale faces, lowered their heads, and peeked behind him with the corner of their eyes. The short and fat acolyte turned around and saw Wizard Amen, who had a pale face and a fierce expression like an eagle. "Speak, who advanced to rank 4 again?" Wizard Amen's voice was cold and cruel, like a bone-chilling wind blowing from a bottomless abyss. The short and fat acolyte couldn't help but shiver. It's that vampire witch, Wizard Mary." Chapter 1191. Io Valley. Origin Tower of the Dark Witches, the location of the Dark Secret Realm. In a large wizard hall on the 11th floor of the Wizard's Pagoda, a black teleportation portal slowly opened up a screen of light. The dozen or so witches waiting in front of the teleportation portal were all covered in black robes, their hoods hanging low, their bodies overflowing with a thick and chilling aura. They were all elite dark witches belonging to the Dark Witches Dark Group. Even the weakest among them had the power of a high-level level 2, while the rest of the members were around mid-level level 3. A team of dark witches with such powerful combat abilities, and led by a level 4 witch elder, was a terrifying force that would inspire awe and fear in any dimension. And today they had gathered here, obviously to carry out a secret dark mission. When the spatial energy on the light curtain no longer fluctuated and became dense, the leading witch standing by the door slightly nodded her head. The other witches silently drilled into the light curtain, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. Soon, the 16 elites of the Dark Witches Dark Group had all entered the screen of light, leaving only the leader of the Dark Group, Claudia, and leader Circe, shrouded in black smoke, at the side. The curtain of darkness has already enveloped that dimension. The other party could not have predicted your arrival in advance. So, end the battle quickly, and leave the dimension immediately after snatching the divine fire orb. I will wait for your return here at the door of darkness. In the silent hall, Circe's low and hoarse voice rang out. Claudia, the leader of the dark group, turned her head and glanced at her coldly and said angrily, "Using the elites of our dark group to snatch the treasure for that bastard, you're really making us dark witches proud. If this operation results in heavy casualties, you'll have to wait to explain to Lady Marvina." Circe's face was hidden in the darkness, and no one could see the changes in her expression. They could only hear her strange voice. "How to explain to Lady Marvina is my business. As long as I am the leader of the Dark Witches, you must carry out the internal decisions of the family." "Why, Claudia, do you want to challenge me now?" Claudia let out a muffled grunt, no longer speaking, and lowered her head to enter the dark screen of light. When her huge and pure dark power broke through the dimensional barrier and broke into the other plane, a small silhouette of that other world appeared on the light screen. As far as the eye could see, not a single blade of grass grew. The Scarlet Land was filled with boiling hot sand, broken rocks, and huge volcanoes that were emitting thick black smoke. High up in the sky, a huge fireball was constantly spitting out scorching light and heat, scorching the entire world. A moment later, the power of darkness enveloped the door of darkness once again, and the image projected on the light screen slowly disappeared. However, for no reason, the temperature in the hall had quietly increased by more than 10 degrees. When the hall regained its silence, and she was the only one left in front of the door of darkness, Circe sighed and turned to leave. In another plane ruled by the Pale Witch, the Farron Plane, a bloody battle was continuing. The elite team of dark witches that came from another plane directly broke into the central mountains of the Callan continent, where they frantically besieged the main temple of the goddess of moonlight Miwe. Due to the existence of a huge curtain of darkness, all the elven temples in the Callan continent had lost direct contact with the gods they believed in. Due to the witch calamity, many of the temple guards were also transferred to the Southwest War Zone. Therefore, in the entire area of the temple, Only the elven priestesses with the highest divine favor could resist the surprise attack of the dark witches. Unfortunately, although the priestesses were protected by powerful divine spells, they could only defend the main shrine and resist the constant sneak attacks of the enemies, when faced with the dark witches who could come and go without a trace and were skilled in killing. Although the news of the attacks came one after another from various temples, the temple of the goddess of moonlight Miwe was the only one that suffered the greatest loss. It was attacked by many high-level dark witches, and even the priestess died on the spot. The moon spring that was enshrined in the temple had also disappeared, falling into the hands of the witches of the other world. After a while, the curtain of darkness dissipated. The elven gods once again got in touch with the main temple, from which they received the news that made the gods furious. For a moment, the major elven temples were surrounded by light, and the aura of divine power rose to the sky. One by one, the divine avatars or projections of the gods descended on their respective temples. Then, led by the avatar of the goddess of elves, they rushed out of the central mountains and began to track down the evil witches who had fled. Under the true vision of their divine power avatars, no dark creature could escape their pursuit. Therefore, fierce and violent battles broke out one after another in every corner of the Kalan continent. Unfortunately, the dark witches that came from another plane were extremely familiar with such surprise attacks, and they also had a perfect escape plan. They unscrupulously summoned a large number of dark creatures, letting them sneak around and disturb the cities and villages that lacked the protection of divine spells. Meanwhile, they scattered and hid themselves, quietly slipping away to the reserved evacuation point. Although some of the dark witches were caught by the avatars of the gods and died on the battlefield, most of the dark witches successfully escaped from the enemy's pursuit. However, most of the dark witches managed to escape and return to the sorcerer world from the evacuation point. The moon spring also followed them to the wizard world. Half a month later, on the top floor of the Tower of Destiny, the leader of the dark witches, Circe, accompanied by Alice, met the legendary fire wizard who teleported here, Grim. Although both sides had fought against each other countless times, this was the first time they had a face-to-face discussion. Grim still looked like he had yet to recover from a serious injury. Grim's big red robe was wrapped around his tall and muscular body, and he still looked young and energetic. But anyone with a discerning eye could see that Grim was only putting on a brave front. He was especially weak in the most important aspect of an elemental sorcerer, the mental aspect. However, no matter how weak a grade 4 wizard was, he was still a lion that no one dared to insult. Therefore, when Grim stepped into the hall and met Circe's eyes, he could clearly feel the vigilance and hatred in her eyes. "It's a pleasure to meet you here, Ms. Circe. We finally meet." Grim could not help but sigh. Circe glanced at Grim for a moment, then shifted her gaze to the shadow below him. Two beams of black light shot out from the black mist that shrouded her face and pierced through the boundary between darkness and reality. She saw some other images that she hated bitterly. "I'm not in the mood to talk nonsense with you here. According to our agreement, let's trade." Circe went straight to the point. At this moment, Alice, who was beside her, could not help but interrupt. "According to our agreement, the dark witches will exchange the Vulcan orb and the moon spring for the shadow orb. Since leader Circe is here, you must have gained something. Why don't we take a look at the goods first?" Hearing Alice calmly mention the two otherworld treasures, Circe's face, hidden in the black fog, twitched a little. Others might not know how much the dark witches had paid for it, but as the leader of the dark witches, she knew it very well. That price was simply heavy to the point that it caused her to feel slightly dejected. The Vulcan orb was a divine weapon created by Renai, the god of flames in the world of gods. It was not any weaker than the shadow orb. Hence, it was an impossible task to snatch the divine fire bead from him. Fortunately, Alice had long since divined that the divine fire bead would be given to an important believer during a planar war in the past. Hence, the Dark Witches had used this opportunity to launch a sudden attack, heavily injuring the believer and stealing the Vulcan orb. Of course, the Dark Witches had paid a heavy price for this operation. The leader of the Dark Witches, Claudia, had been heavily injured, and would need more than 30 years of recuperation to expel the violent flames in her body. The Dark Witches had lost 1 Grade 3 and 3 Grade 2 witches. Since they had been injured by the divine weapon, their souls had no chance to escape, and they had no chance of resurrection. As for the Moon Spring, it was a divine object of the elves in the Farron Plain. It was enshrined in the main shrine of the goddess of moonlight, Miwe. The difficulty of snatching a divine object from there was beyond imagination. The Dark Witches had paid the price of 5 Grade 2 witches. Hence, Circe's expression could be said to be colorful when she heard Alice's question. She was silent for a long time before she waved her hand and released 2 Grade 5 items. The divine fire bead was a fist-sized bead that was constantly burning with an inextinguishable golden flame. At this moment, as soon as it was released from the sealed space, it quickly transformed into a huge fireball, which continued to expand and burn the prairie. The temperature in the hall on the top floor began to rise rapidly, as though it would turn into a world of molten fire. Grimm closed his eyes, sensing the dense fire elemental particles in the air. All the cells and life in his body were roaring with all their might, wanting to devour the Vulcan orb and make it a part of his own power. It was indeed a Grade 5 divine weapon, and an offensive one at that. To Grimm, the value of this item was far greater than the shadow orb that did not match. After inspecting it, Grimm looked at Alice and saw that she nodded silently. He knew that the Moon Spring was genuine and not a fake one. Only then did he spread out his right hand, and a pitch-black metal claw stretched out from the shadows below him, handing the shadow pearl to him. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.